Welcome to another gentle journey into the depths of the past. Tonight, we'll be setting out on a rather wearisome journey, one that might just send you off to sleep before we've even reached the first milestone. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of an ancient Roman road, stretching far beyond the horizon, as straight and as unforgiving as the empire itself. The stones beneath your feet are worn smooth in some places, jagged in others, and the air hums with the distant shuffle of travelers' carts and beasts of burden. You might think at first that this is the beginning of an adventure, but by the end of this story you'll know why traveling on one of these famed Roman roads was anything but. We'll follow the footsteps of Julius Caesar himself, whose movements across these roads and battlefields shaped the destiny of an empire in his own. Then we'll pause to explore the lingering mysteries beneath the surface of the empire's vast road network. Those lost milestones and ancient remnants rediscovered by patient hands. And finally, we'll leave the roads behind to sit in the quiet courtyards of the Roman elite, where comfort, luxury, and leisure awaited those with the means to stay home. So find yourself a comfortable position, allow your breath to slow and your mind to drift. Our road begins. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a small Roman town. The sun is just beginning to lift itself above the horizon, casting a faint golden hue over crumbling walls and tiled roofs. The air is cool for now, but you know that the day ahead will bring relentless heat, or perhaps sudden rain depending on the whims of the season. Perhaps messages, or maybe you're simply a pilgrim, a tradesman, or a soldier on the move. There is no comfortable carriage waiting for you. Instead, there is the road. You've been instructed to deliver goods. Instead, there stood the milestone columns inscribed in Latin, of course telling you how many Roman miles remained to the next town or way station. But even these markers offered little comfort when your feet were blistered, your back sore, your stomach empty. Stretched before you as far as the eye can see is a strip of stone meticulously laid, and yet uneven to the foot. The Romans built their roads to last, it is true, but longevity came at a cost. The paving stones, polygonal and tight-fitting, still shifted over time. Places they jutted like the teeth of a broken comb. You will find no place there for you. The sound of wooden cartwheels creaking and groaning on the uneven surface follows you, if you're fortunate enough to find one. But these are no cozy inns. The air inside is stale, the bedding rough and infested with lice. The food, when it comes, is often cold, salted, and tough. A thin soup, a heel of bread, and perhaps some diluted wine if you can afford it. The carts offer little relief. They shake and rattle so fiercely that many travelers preferred to walk rather than risk a spine-jarring ride. Slaves sent on errands for their distant masters. They preyed on lone travelers, lightening their burdens of coin, possessions, or worse. But for the common traveler, it was no romantic adventure. In others, gaps had formed, pooling water into muddy traps for the unwary. The rhythm of your life becomes the sound of footsteps, the jangle of coins, the occasional snap of a mule's reins. These were no smooth highways. There were no signs, no pleasant mile markers as you might know today. It was risk, your dust-covered clothes. Your cautious glances over your shoulder might begin to understand why few relished the thought of long journeys. It was most often a necessity rather than a choice. And when it rains, that dust turns to slick, treacherous mud that clings to your feet, slows your progress, and seeps into your bones with a cold dampness. Imagine the steady plod of your sandals, worn thin, as each step echoes with the rhythm of discomfort. And yet walk, you must, pass others along the way. Traders leading mules, burdened with free of wine and oil. Soldiers in formation, their armor clinking softly. The air is sometimes thick with dust, churned up by the hooves of animals and the boots of thousands who have walked before you. There are way stations, yes. The Mansionese government-run lodgings for official travelers. But unless you carry the right permissions, the diploma, a written warrant. Instead, you might seek shelter in a roadside tavern, and outside. Danger lurks. The Roman roads may have been patrolled, but they were not always safe. Bandits waited in forested stretches or behind rocky outcrops. So you walk on, cautious and weary, feeling the ache in your legs and the dull throb of fatigue behind your eyes. At night, if you find no shelter, you might sleep on the ground, with your cloak for a blanket, the stars for your ceiling, and every shadow a potential threat. This was the reality of travel in the Roman world. The empire's famed roads connected every corner of their vast territories, from the chill reaches of Britannia to the golden sands of Egypt. It was toil. And so, as you imagine your blistered feet, and yet some traveled farther, faster, and more relentlessly than any common citizen. One man in particular marched legions across these roads through rain, dust, and blood. Let us now follow in his footsteps and see how the life of Julius Caesar was shaped by the very roads we have just imagined underfoot. And so, with the steady rhythm of sandals upon stone still echoing faintly in your mind, we turn our attention to a man for whom the Roman road was not just a pathway but a mechanism of power, Julius Caesar. Perhaps you already picture him as the conqueror, the general in crimson-dyed cloak, the laurel wreath upon his brow. But before these trappings of grandeur, he was simply a Roman. Not the lonely traveler, but the steady advance of a legion. These roads allowed Caesar to move his forces swiftly, to respond to uprisings, to shift strategies with a speed that overwhelmed his enemies. He was a rising figure in the volatile world of Roman politics, a world in which presence and persuasion were as critical as swords and shields. His campaign in Gaul, spanning nearly a decade, is a masterclass in movement, logistics, and ceaseless momentum. Instead, he marched again. This time, the road before him was the Via Flaminia, leading southward, toward the city itself. But his ambition, vast and unrelenting, demanded more than words. When he crossed, in defiance of Roman law, he set in motion a civil war that would shake the Republic to its core. Roads that had carried trade and tribute now bore the weight of civil war. Caesar is said to have uttered these words as he crossed the Rubicon in irrevocable choice made under gray skies. The current of the river slow and shallow, yet heavy with consequence. 10,000 men, marching in precise formation. Their sandals slap against the stones, their armor creaks with each deliberate step, and their heavy packs thud softly with every pace forward. It was not on a road, nor on a battlefield that his journey ended. Roads, rivers, and selanes became extensions of his will. And so, the man who had crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and marched uncounted miles, fell not on stone or battlefield, but on the cold floor of politics. A man constantly on the move, his life propelled by both ambition and necessity. The streets of Rome may have hummed with life that Davender's calling, carts rattling, footsteps of ordinary Romans moving through their daily routines. Rome was his ultimate prize, yet it was far from the end. His movements took him across the Mediterranean, to Greece, Egypt, and beyond. In Egypt, he became entangled with Cleopatra, a story often colored with romance, but at its heart, a political maneuver rooted in the same restless drive that had carried him across the known world. Imagine now. Caesar's journeys began in the political sphere of Rome itself. To grasp power in Rome, Caesar would first march outward into Gaul, across the Alps, through thick forests and over fast rivers, the crunch of frost underfoot, the breath of men and horses rising in pale clouds. Even in winter, Caesar pushed forward, refusing to be bound by the seasons as lesser generals might. He crossed the Via Domitia, the first Roman road built in Gaul, stretching from Italy into the provinces of what is now southern France. Imagine the chill of the alpine winds as he crossed into unknown lands. His soldiers revered and feared his relentlessness. He marched with them, slept as they slept on the hard ground, under canvas tents or the open sky. Their journey was marked not by leisure, but by discipline, and the ever-present threat of ambush. When his conquests in Gaul were complete, Caesar did not return to Rome as a contented man. It was along these roads that he crossed the Rubicon, a shallow river that marked the boundary between his province and Italy proper. You may know the phrase, "the die is cast." Thus began another march. His legions, seasoned and loyal, moved steadily through Italy. Towns surrendered without a fight. But even the mighty Caesar could not remain always on the march. Everywhere he went, Caesar traveled swiftly, decisively, unrelentingly, and yet, in the end, it was in the heart of Rome itself. In the theater of Pompey, surrounded not by soldiers but by senators. But within that hall, Caesar's own march came to a sudden halt. The blades of betrayal fell swiftly, carried out by men who once might have marched beside him on those very roads. The roads of Rome carried his body through the city one last time, borne on the shoulders of men, and still the roads remained. The very paths that had enabled Caesar's rise would continue to bear others: merchants, generals, messengers, and pilgrims. But many of these ancient roads have since disappeared beneath the soil, or crumbled into obscurity. Perhaps now we should explore those remnants. Those curious stones and forgotten milestones that silently tell the story of a network that once spanned an empire. Let us walk onward, more slowly now, to the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of the Roman roads. Let us slow our pace even further now. Let the imagined heat of the midday sun cool. Let the press of marching feet and the clatter of carts fade into the distance. For beneath the ground, beneath cities and fields, forests and meadows, the roads of Rome still slumber. Scattered along these roads like forgotten sentinels, stand or once stood the milestones. Picture a tall, cylindrical stone pillar, weathered by wind and rain, its surface rough and pitted with age. If you look closely, you may still see the faint etchings of Latin script, inscriptions dedicating the road and its distance from the heart of Rome, the Miliarium, Orium, the golden milestone. Soil builds up, roads collapse, stones are taken for other use, broken into foundations, or left to sink slowly into the earth. Every road in the empire, they said, led to Rome, and that central point in the Forum Romanum marked the symbolic origin. A milestone, perhaps 2 meters tall, emerges, its carved letters still legible after 2 millennia. A dedication, perhaps, to an Emperor Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian. Their names forever linked to the roads they maintained or repaired. From there, the empire measured its expanse in milestones, each carved to declare the distance traveled from the capital, like quiet witnesses counting the slow passage of miles. But these markers did not always endure. In some cases, the inscriptions had been erased either by time or by deliberate hands, often when one emperor fell from favor and his memory was officially erased. A practice known as damnatio memoria. In parts of Britain, for example, the Fosseway or the Via Julia in Spain, their roots still influence present-day roads. Time, as always, is a patient eraser. Yet, archaeologists, with their careful hands and patient eyes, have recovered many such remnants. Imagine them now, brushing away the soil grain by grain. As a rounded shape emerges beneath the dirt, stones are uneven, flecked with moss, surrounded by silent fields, as do the stones that counted their miles. They shaped trade, communication, governance, and the very structure of the Roman world. You can picture the same creaking carts that rattled along when Caesar himself marched to the Rubicon. A cross-section reveals the methodical genius of Roman engineering, durable, practical, and designed to endure. And step gently into the marbled halls and shaded gardens of the Roman elite. You might find pottery shards nearby, or fragments of old shoes, the soft echoes of those who passed this way centuries before. Each inscription is a quiet declaration of imperial reach, a mark of pride, of ownership, of order imposed upon distance. The roads bound the provinces together. Others have been found in unexpected places, deep in forests, submerged in rivers, or embedded in the walls of medieval buildings, repurposed by generations who scarcely knew or cared of their origin, a reminder that movement leaves its mark, no matter how slowly the years may cover it. Not all Romans had to brave the road's discomforts. A traveler reading the milestones would know precisely how far they stood from the center of power. But not all roads and their markers have been so cooperative. Some milestones are still missing, mentioned in ancient texts but lost to time. There are stories of milestones recovered from plowed fields, mistaken for curious rocks until a farmer's plow clinked against the stubborn stone. But some stones stubbornly preserve their memory, carrying through the centuries the names of men long gone. Not only the milestones remain, portions of the roads themselves have been uncovered beneath modern streets under layers of cobblestone and asphalt. Imagine walking along one such uncovered stretch. Archaeologists have even discovered the ruts worn deep into the stone by the wheels of ancient carts, silent records of repetitive journeys. In some places, where roadbeds were built with layers of gravel, sand, and large stones, these layers are still intact beneath the surface. And though many roads are broken, buried, or lost, their impact lingers. Even in death, the roads persist. There is a comfort in that persistence, isn't there? A steady presence, but of course, some watch the world move from the serenity of their estates, never troubling themselves with muddy paths or dangerous forests. Let us now tire from the dust and stone of the road. We will see how very different life could be. For those who stayed at home, step away now. From the weary traveler's burden, the grime of the road, the ache in the feet, imagine instead a grand villa perched on a hillside, the air perfumed not with dust, but with the faint fragrance of laurel, cypress, and the sweet flowering vines that drape lazily over stone archways. Here resides the Roman senator. While the roads carried soldiers, merchants, and messengers far and wide, the senator's world was often confined to spaces of ease, order, and cultivated beauty. The villa itself, a sprawling complex of marble, polished wood, and delicate mosaics, was a symbol of power, stability, and taste. Imagine walking through the entrance, the atrium, where a shallow pool of water known as the impluvium collects the rain that falls gently through the open roof. Light filters softly through this space, dancing across the intricate patterns of the floor, each tile laid with patient precision by skilled hands. Small oil lamps glow faintly even in the daylight, their flames steady and unhurried. A servant approaches silently, offering wine sweetened with honey, served not in earthenware, but in delicate glass, or perhaps a goblet of silver. In the basilicae of the Forum, he debates policy, listens to arguments, and dispenses influence. But when the business of governance tires him, he returns to his villa, where bathhouses await. In the private rooms beyond, the cubiculum, soft couches are draped with finely woven fabrics from the East. Reclining on couches, guests are entertained with music, poetry, or gentle conversation. Courses arrive one by one: eggs and fish, tender meats, delicately seasoned vegetables, platters of fruits and confections of honey and nuts. The air is filled with a quiet hum of voices, punctuated by laughter, but never boisterous, always measured, always dignified. And finally, the frigidarium, cold and bracing. Servants stand ready with towels, oils for the skin, and combs for the hair. The senator rises late, perhaps, for there is no urgency here. The roads, though unseen, remain the arteries of Rome, connecting this tranquil world to the chaos, toil, and striving beyond. The bed is low but broad, its mattress filled with wool or feathers, sheets smooth against the skin. Morning might begin with a light malaves, cheese, fresh bread, still warm from the ovens of the estate. The bread is not the coarse, dark loaf of a soldier's ration, but pale and soft, its crust lightly dusted with flour.
Ow.
Drunkenness is frowned upon. Moderation is the sign of civility. He moves next to his study, the tablinum, where scrolls are stored neatly in wooden cabinets. Here, correspondence is dictated to scribes. Grain from Africa, silk from the East, rumors from the provinces all find their way here, by road, by sea, by word of mouth. Matters of estate, politics, or trade. The scratching of the stylus on wax tablets is a gentle background sound, or hardships but an abstract thought. Here, in the comfort of marbled halls, the empire feels ordered, predictable. A world that bends to the will of its masters. Rhythmic, almost soothing. Beyond the formalities, the senator might stroll through the peristyle garden, shaded courtyard adorned with marble statues of gods and heroes. The air is cooler here, the splash of fountains blending with the distant call of birds. And yet, the senator's day is not entirely idle. Picture the sequence of the Roman bath, the caldarium, hot and steamy, where sweat purges the impurities of the day. The tepidarium, warm and tranquil. The body is refreshed, the mind placid. Then comes the evening meal, the scene of feast that could last for hours. Wine flows, but it is always mixed with water as custom dictates. Soft light from bronze oil lamps glimmers on polished surfaces. When the evening grows late, the senator retires to his chambers. Outside, the villa is quiet. The roads that crisscross the empire are distant. And yet, Even these walls cannot wholly shut out the world. Messengers arrive with news carried swiftly across Roman roads. The senator sleeps, knowing the empire stretches vast beyond his estate. As sleep gently overtakes him, so too might it find you now. But before we close our journey entirely, let us reflect, quietly, one final time. Imagine yourself seated in a small, enclosed room. The walls are made of thick mud brick, the air heavy and warm. With the faint smell of damp clay lingering just beneath the surface, a narrow slit high on the wall lets in some daylight, but not much. A member of an elite but weary profession in ancient Mesopotamia. Your days unfold much the same morning to night, shaping the soft surface of clay into tablets etched with the precise strokes of cuneiform script. Shadows cling to the corners, and even at midday the space feels dim. Your only tools rest before you a reed stylus, sharp and narrow, and a flattened slab of clay, cool and pliant to the touch. You are a scribe. The temples require inventories of offerings made to the gods. Merchants need contracts for trade agreements, stipulations spelled out in flawless detail. Each mark matters. These moments offer slight variation, but they demand even greater care. Their young scribes learned not only writing but mathematics, counting, and law, all essential to maintaining the administrative machinery of the city. Literacy was rare, and those who mastered it held the keys to knowledge and power, though often without sharing in either directly. A king's legacy depends on your precision. If you err, you must start again. You have shaped dozens of tablets, their surfaces covered in dense script. It endures. Once dried, these will be stacked in archives, some for immediate use. Others stored in clay jars for years, perhaps centuries. Each wedge pressed by the stylus must be sharp, clear, and consistent. A slip of the hand, a moment of fatigue, and the message could be lost, or worse, misunderstood by the palace officials who depend on your records. They will read your careful records of barley shipments, or the debts owed between merchants, or even fragments of stories, pieces of humanity pressed into clay. The oil lamp flickers when daylight fails, its flame steady but dim, casting long shadows across the tablet's surface. The stylus presses down, your fingers growing stiff with each imprint. You pause only to refresh the clay when it dries too quickly or to sharpen the point of your reed, and there is pressure, until the rhythm of labor itself becomes a form of quiet, resigned meditation. The palace demands records of taxes collected, grain stored, livestock counted. The scribes are trusted not because their work is creative, but because it is exact. A misplaced mark could lead to disputes and punishment. Now, imagine the posture you must hold for hours, hunched low over the clay, shoulders tight, neck bent, eyes straining in the half-light, would inspire a tale that echoed far beyond its origins. The work is repetitive. Same symbols, the same lists, again and again. Outside the world of Uruk, or Nipper bustles markets filled with traders, the low hum of prayers at the temple, the heavy tread of soldiers. But for you, the world is narrowed to the surface of the tablet. Occasionally you might be tasked with copying a hymn, or an epic, or a royal inscription. The school that trained youth at Edaba, or Tablet House, was strict. Discipline was enforced with sharp words and sharper sticks. And yet for all the tedium, the role of scribe held a certain prestige. At day's end, your hands are stained with clay, your back aches, and your eyes struggle to adjust to the dusk outside the scriptorium. You may not see glory, nor wealth, but your work. Thousands of years later, archaeologists will uncover these tablets, their inscriptions still legible. But in your time, the work is simply work. Tiring, meticulous, essential, unchanging. And so, the days pass. The clay is prepared. The stylus is sharpened. The marks are made again and again. But even as the scribes wrote, stories began to take shape. One city in particular, one figure in particular, ... Let us now step quietly into that city, to Uruk, to the legend of Gilgamesh. Let us now lift our gaze from the clay tablet, peer out across the vastness of the Mesopotamian plains. There, resting between the slow, winding curves of the Euphrates River, once stood the great city of Uruk. Imagine yourself approaching it not as it stands now, fragmented and subdued under layers of soil but as it was in its prime. Over 4,000 years ago, massive walls encircled the city, rising with an authority that could be felt before a single word was exchanged. These walls, stretching for miles, were built of mud brick, sun-baked and sturdy. A figure part king, part demigod, entirely memorable, though the tales of Gilgamesh would be captured by scribes, etched carefully into clay. They began as oral tradition stories told around fires, in market stalls, and in the shaded courtyards of homes. The stories paint him as restless, ever seeking meaning, immortality, and understanding of life's fleeting nature. They formed not just a barrier, but a statement of might and permanence. The Ina district, dedicated to the goddess Inanna, is the heart of spiritual life, its shrines adorned with offerings of food, jewelry, and finely crafted goods. It was here that the legend of Gilgamesh was born. Archaeologists tell us that at its height it may have held tens of thousands of inhabitants, a marvel of early urban life. Over centuries, the city saw periods of revival and decline, its fortunes tied to the broader currents of Mesopotamian politics and environmental change. Its economy thrived on trade timber from distant lands, copper from the mountains, precious stones carried by caravan. The walls of Uruk, once so proud, slowly crumbled. Temples fell silent. The voices of its markets faded, replaced by the slow encroachment of dust and time. But Gilgamesh was more than legend to the people of Uruk, seeking an answer to the question that haunts every age. How does one achieve lasting legacy? Their careful work ensured that while Uruk's walls might crumble, its memory would not. Perhaps even now you can imagine them hunched over their tablets. Within its verses lie themes of friendship, mortality, loss, and the search for meaning, themes as resonant now as they were then. The marks made by those scribes still sleep, waiting to be read, capturing the deeds of a king who may have been equal parts man and myth. He was a symbol of their city's grandeur, its ambitions, its towering pride. He was said to have built the mighty walls of Uruk himself, to have ruled with both strength and cruelty, capturing stories both mundane and monumental. Picture Uruk in his time a city of bustling avenues, crowded markets, grand temples, and the sacred ziggurat rising high above it all. But beyond the epic tales, Uruk was very real. Its scribes, countless in number, worked diligently to record transactions, property holdings, offerings to the gods, and the exploits of rulers. But no city, however grand, lasts forever. The rise of Uruk was accompanied by competition, by shifting alliances, by the relentless encroachment of neighboring powers. The rivers that once nourished its fields shifted course. Trade routes changed. Other cities, your Lagash, Babylon, rose to eclipse it. Yet, Gilgamesh endured. The Epic of Gilgamesh, preserved on clay tablets by scribes long after the city's decline, remains the oldest surviving work of literature known to us. When Gilgamesh mourns the death of his companion Enkidu, he embarks on a journey to understand life's impermanence. Perhaps the answer, humbly, lay in the hands of the scribes. And so, as we imagine the skyline of Uruk at its height, the ziggurats silhouetted against the vast Mesopotamian sky, remember that beneath every stone, every temple, lay the quiet labor of scribes. Today, only ruins remain. But beneath the dust, beneath the earth, perhaps now, we should turn our attention to that very dust, to the work of those who gently uncover these remnants, piecing together what time has hidden. Let us walk softly now, into the ruins of Uruk, with the archaeologists who read the earth itself. Let us tread quietly now, into the sands and soil of southern Iraq, where the ruins of Uruk rest, mostly silent, mostly still. The air here carries a dry warmth, the wind shifting fine grains of dust over half-buried stones. In the distance, the outlines of ancient walls and platforms rise subtly from the earth, like the bones of a long-forgotten creature beneath the surface. Archaeologists came here first in the 19th century, their maps crude, their knowledge incomplete. But still, curiosity led them onward. Uruk was not just legend. Its ruins revealed themselves slowly, patiently, as trenches were dug and brush was swept away. The gentle whisk of a brush along a fragment of clay, A flash of inscribed, marked, wedge-shaped, tightly ordered, cuneiform tablet, intact after thousands of years, its impressions still sharp enough to catch a fingernail. Imagine the careful scraping of a trowel against compacted earth. These discoveries were not glamorous. The process was slow, methodical, marked by heat, sweat, and long days of seemingly small rewards. Yet, in time, layer upon layer of Uruk's story emerged. There was the Ina district, with its massive platform foundations, thought to be the base of monumental temples. The walls no longer tower, but their foundations trace the shape of the city's former might. In their prime, these would have been the heart of ritual life, where priests and priestesses conducted ceremonies to honor Inanna, goddess of love and war. One wrong mark, and the entire tablet might need to be reworked. Imagine the scribe, frowning gently as they pressed each wedge. The clay cooled beneath their fingers, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. Nearby, remnants of walls hinted at the defensive strength Gilgamesh was credited with building. These served as signatures, identifiers of ownership or authority. Each seal was intricate, depicting scenes of gods, animals, or mythical beings. But over time, the symbols became more abstract, evolving into a system of lines and wedges pressed into clay with the stylus's careful edge. But it was the tablets, the small, unassuming clay records, that offered the clearest voice from the past. There are traces of early urban planning streets laid out with care, public spaces, homes clustered in neighborhoods, kilns for pottery, workshops for metals, all signs of a city alive with industry and purpose. Both etch understanding into the surface of the world, one in clay, the other in journals and maps. Both seek to capture what is fleeting and preserve it against time's steady erasure. Over 4,000 of them have been recovered from Uruk alone. The shifting earth, the encroaching desert, the passage of empires, all conspired to cover its traces. We cannot know for certain. Having walked the dusty paths of Uruk's ruins, let us rise from the sun-baked remains of the city and move toward the heart of power that once governed it. Many are economic records lists of commodities, grain distributions, livestock tallies, but some contain hymns, prayers, and the earliest forms of literature, including early copies of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The writing itself, cuneiform, began here. At first, it was pictographic, simple images representing ideas. The script was efficient, but unforgiving. Archaeologists also uncovered cylinder seals, small carved stones rolled onto clay to leave unique impressions. To hold one now would be to hold a personal emblem, a mark of identity from 4,000 years ago. Uruk's remains reveal more than buildings and writing, yet for all this, much of Uruk remains buried and still. The ruins keep their secrets. Every excavation adds a fragment to the puzzle. Every tablet deciphered adds a voice to the chorus of the past. What was it like to stand atop the ziggurat, looking out across the city, hearing the distant hum of markets, the soft chanting from temples? But the stones remember, even when we forget. The archaeologist's work is not unlike the scribes, and now to the palace. To see how the rulers of Mesopotamia lived, far from the aching backs and cramped hands of the scribes. Let us leave behind the dim scribe's chamber, brittle clay tablets, the worn tools, ... and step into the wide and echoing halls of the palace. Here, life moves to a different rhythm. Imagine the approach to the palace massive gates, adorned with carved reliefs of mythical creatures. Lions, bulls, creatures part human and part divine, all meant to impress and intimidate. The floors beneath your feet are smooth, some adorned with decorative inlays, though much is worn with time. The rulers of Mesopotamia, whether kings, priests, or both, lived, surrounded by this gentle bustle of care and attention. Dried fruit states, figs, apricots, piled high in woven baskets, alongside nuts and honey. The walls are thick, the corridors cool despite the heat outside, their shade a respite from the relentless Mesopotamian sun. Their melodies are soft, repetitive, hypnotic, weaving a gentle background to the murmur of conversation. Within these walls, the air carries the scent of incense, resin, and myrrh burned in quiet offerings to the gods. They wear jewelry of gold and lapis lazuli, the stones catching the flicker of oil lamps. all noted and recorded, for the god's will was thought to be written in the skies. Messengers arrive with clay tablets bearing news from other cities, warnings of unrest, trade opportunities, or celestial omens. The palace archives are filled with tablets, neatly organized contracts, decrees, letters. These clay records ensure the machinery of state continues to function smoothly. Servants move quietly, their presence almost unnoticed but constant. They carry food, water, fine linens. A feast is being prepared. The aroma of roasting meats, stewed legumes, and baked flatbreads fills the air. The dining area is not as you might imagine a modern banquet hall. The marketplace stills, the temples fall silent, save for the low chants of priests maintaining a ceaseless vigil to the gods. Guests recline on mats or low couches, sharing platters of food, dipping bread into bowls of sauces seasoned with garlic. Onions and exotic spices traded from distant lands. The other of toil, precision, and quiet endurance. Jugs of beer and wine, though coarse by modern standards, are passed and shared, strained through reeds to catch the sediment. The ruler retires to private quarters, adorned with embroidered fabrics, carved furniture, and amulets for protection and sleep, to reflect on the passage of time and on the soft, steady thread of memory that connects their world to ours. Music drifts through the hall harps, lyres, and flutes played by trained musicians. Nearby, dancers move slowly, their motions deliberate and practiced. In private chambers or atop temple platforms, offerings are made: bread, beer, incense, sometimes even small livestock, each presented with chants and invocations. Priests are also present, their roles never far from the ruling elite. The gods must be honored, rituals maintained. And from the ziggurat, the stepped tower rising in tiers above the city, priests observe the heavens, stars, planets, the phases of the moon. The ruler's responsibilities extend beyond indulgence. There are petitions to hear, disputes to settle, alliances to consider. Even here, the work of the scribe is never far, yet the contrast is sharp. While the scribe labors in a cramped chamber, the king strolls through gardens, plots of date palms, flowering shrubs, and shaded colonnades where cool water trickles through channels. At night, the palace quiets. Torches glow faintly along the walls, their light soft and flickering. Beyond the palace walls, the city settles into night. And somewhere, in a small chamber, a scribe extinguishes his lamp, setting aside his stylus until morning. Two worlds intertwined, yet so distinct, one of luxury, ritual, and power. This was the rhythm of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization where the grandeur of kings stood atop the steady labor of those who wrote their stories into clay. And as we prepare to close this journey, let us pause. Imagine yourself standing on a narrow strip of shoreline. The sky above is gray and heavy, the clouds dragging low as if reluctant to rise. The air is damp, thick with the mingling scent of salt, seaweed, and fish. Always fish. You are in a Viking fishing village, a collection of wooden huts with sod roofs, their walls sealed with tar, and mud to keep the worst of the weather out, though never entirely. Fingers numb and raw must work carefully to untangle them, removing seaweed, debris, and hopefully the occasional fish. Other days, the nets come up nearly empty, and the pit in your stomach grows a little deeper. The wind finds its way in, the cold fingers of winter grasping even through the smallest cracks. The sea is your livelihood. Woolen cloaks and tunics offer some protection, but they are often damp, retaining the wet rather than repelling it. The village itself carries the same aroma: fish, drying on racks, skins curing. Smoke rising from cooking fires where meals are little more than boiled fish or thin stews stretched with barley or root vegetables. When available, waves crash with a violence that shatters boats, pulls men under, never to be seen again. There is little time for play and fewer moments of rest. But staying ashore guarantees nothing. Either empty bellies gnaw at resolve, and winter stores are never sufficient. The single fire burns low to conserve fuel, its smoke escaping through a small hole in the roof. Even in sleep, the cold never entirely leaves. The cold seeps in, settling into the bones, a constant ache in the hands, the feet, the back. But it is no friend. The sounds of hammers on wood, knives on bone, and the occasional sharp cry as fingers catch in nets or splinters bite into flesh. Each morning begins before the sun properly rises. The days are short, the light pale and fleeting. The first task? Check the nets. You trudge through sand mixed with grit and ice, the shoreline slick and treacherous underfoot. The nets are heavy, soaked with seawater, stiff with the chill. The catch is never guaranteed. Some days bring bounty cod, herring, or even the occasional flatfish. There is no escape from the cold. You smell of fish, salt, and smoke, a blend that clings no matter how often you rinse in the sea. And then there's the labor. Boats must be hauled onto shore and repaired tar applied to the hulls to keep water out, planks replaced, ropes retied. The tools are simple, the work constant. Nets must be woven anew or mended, each knot tied by hand, eyes straining in the weak light. If storms come, and they often do, the sea is deadly. Children, too, work early. They gather driftwood for fires, tend to the drying fish, and scrape hides clean. The village hums with this rhythm of necessity, noisy, but not merry. At night, families huddle together for warmth, the heat of bodies shared beneath coarse blankets. And yet, this is life. Survival is a matter of habit, of persistence, of bearing the cold, the hunger, the endless damp. You live each day in the shadow of the sea, your fortune rising and falling with the waves. Still, the sea was not merely a place of toilet, was also the pathway to distant lands, to adventure and exile. And for one Viking, the sea would lead not just to new shores, but to a life shaped by ice, ambition, and exile. Let us now sail with Eric the Red. To Greenland, and the harsh world he sought to tame. Let us set sail now, from the damp shores of the Viking fishing village, into the open sea, where the waves roll slow and heavy, under skies that rarely promise kindness. Here the salt air is sharp, and the creaking of wooden planks beneath your feet is a constant reminder that the sea is both pathway and peril. Among those who braved these waters, few are as remembered as Eric the Red. Born in Norway, but exiled to Iceland for his father's crimes, Eric's life was shaped by movement, exile, and the necessity of forging new beginnings where the world seemed most unforgiving. In Iceland, Eric found trouble again. Disputes over land, tempers as sharp as the northern winds, and soon, another exile. This time he was to leave Iceland behind, but rather than submit to obscurity, Eric looked westward. There were rumors, whispered tales of land beyond the ice, green and waiting. And so Eric gathered his kin and companions, their longships cutting through the freezing waters, till they reached a coast of deep fjords, jagged cliffs, and ice-laden shores. He named it ... Greenland, an optimistic name perhaps, chosen to entice settlers. For while the land had patches of green in the short summer, it was mostly stark, cold, and treacherous. Imagine standing there as Eric might have. The air thin and sharp in the lungs, the ground rocky and hard. The summers brief, the winters long, dark, and biting. Still settlements were established. Long houses built with stone walls and turf roofs to hold in heat. Livestock raised, crops attempted barley, perhaps but with limited success. Much of life depended, as always, on the sea. Seals, fish, and the occasional walrus provided sustenance, and their bones became tools, their hides clothing, their fat turned to precious oil for lamps. But the challenges never relented. The soil was poor, the weather unpredictable, and isolation absolute when winter's ice sealed the fjords. He established himself as chieftain. Eric the Red, however, held firm. His settlement at Brattled, becoming the heart of the Greenland colony. It was a hard life, but for a time, it held. Eric's legacy continued through his son, Leif Erikson, who would famously voyage even further west, reaching what many believed to be the shores of North America Vinland, as they called it. But Greenland's colony was always precarious. Resources dwindled, trade with Norway faltered, and the climate itself began to shift Tujuring in the Little Ice Age, a period of even colder weather that made survival increasingly difficult. By the 15th century, the Norse settlements in Greenland had vanished, their farms abandoned, their churches silent, their stone walls slowly giving way to time and ice. What remains today are ruins, stone foundations, fragments of tools, and bones that whisper of hard winters and harder lives. Eric the Red's Greenland was never truly green. It was a land of endurance, relentless struggle against nature. A fitting continuation of the Viking spirit, shaped by the sea, the cold, and the stubborn will to carve life where none seemed possible. And yet, even in this cold world, the Vikings held on to their connection with the sea not only as a provider of food and passage, but as a sacred part of their culture and their death rituals. For when great warriors or chieftains passed, they were sometimes sent to their rest in the very vessels that had carried them through life. Let us now drift gently from Greenland's icy shores to the ship burials of Norway, where the sea's presence followed the Vikings even into the earth itself. Now, let us move inland, away from the relentless seas and the salted air, to the soft, rolling landscapes of Norway, where beneath grassy mounds and quiet fields, ancient ships sleep beneath the earth. Here the soil holds secrets, and among the most remarkable of these are the Viking ship burials. Imagine a long, sleek vessel, once a proud presence on the waves, its wooden hull lined with shields, its sails catching the northern winds. And now lies surrounded by earth, a hollow space filled with offerings for the afterlife. The Vikings believed that the sea was not merely a realm of the living, but also a passageway for the dead. To be laid to rest in a ship was an onerous sign of status, wealth, or power. The most famous of these is the Oseberg ship, discovered in 1904 near a farm in Vestfold, Norway. Buried within a large mound, the ship was remarkably well preserved, its curved prow rising like a graceful serpent, even after 1,000 years in the ground. The ship was not alone. It carried 2 women, one elderly, the other younger. Their identities remain a mystery, but the wealth of goods found with them suggests importance. Perhaps priestesses or noblewomen. There were intricately carved wooden sleighs, carts with iron fittings, textiles, wooden chests, and animal remains. Even cooking tools, woven tapestries, and buckets of apples shrunken with age, but still present. Nearby, other ship burials like the Gokstad ship reveal a similar story. This ship carried a man, likely a chieftain, along with weapons, gaming boards, and sacrificed animals, horses, dogs, companions, for the journey beyond. But not all ship burials were grand. Some were more modest, a simple vessel with fewer offerings, perhaps reflecting the deceased's station in life. What unites them all is the reverence for the sea, the belief that, in death, as in life, the ship would carry the soul onward, to realms unknown. Archaeologists painstakingly excavated these mounds, working with brushes and small tools, carefully exposing the wood. Delicate after centuries underground, the air inside these mounds is cool. Still, the smell of damp earth, heavy but not unpleasant. Each uncovered artifact is a message from the past, silent but telling. Even now, some ship graves remain undiscovered, their exact locations hinted at by ground-penetrating radar. But still untouched, preserved beneath layers of grass and soil. And so the ships remain part vessel, part grave, part testament to a people whose lives were bound to the water, whose spirits even in death sailed on. From these buried ships, we can almost hear the creak of wood, the snap of sails in wind, and the steady rhythm of oars cutting through waves. But the Vikings did not all live among such grandeur. Most lived simple, harsh lives, as we saw in the fishing villages, while a few, very few, lived in comfort, surrounded by warmth, stories, and mead. Let us now step inside the great longhouse of a Viking jarl, where the fires burned high, and winter nights were softened with tales and company. Step now into the warm embrace of timber walls. This is the longhouse of a Viking jarl, a chieftain of means and influence. It stands sturdy against the wind, built from thick wooden beams, its roof steeply pitched and thatched with turf and straw. From outside, smoke escapes gently through a roof vent, a thin plume against the gray northern sky. The air inside is thick with the scents of burning wood, roasting meat, and the sweet fermentation of mead. Cross the threshold and you are met with warmth, a tangible relief after the bitter cold outside. At the heart of the hall runs a long central hearth, its coals glowing a deep orange, casting flickering light across timber walls darkened by smoke and time. Shields and weapons hang in neat display, not merely as decoration, but as reminders of the Jarl's power and the readiness of his household. Here, in this space, life is not a struggle for mere survival, but an existence of command, storytelling, and feasting. A skald or storyteller stands near the fire, reciting sagas of ancient heroes, distant battles, and voyages across treacherous seas. Benches line the sides of the hall, covered in furs and woolen textiles to soften the rough surfaces. Above, the rafters are high and shadowy, the architecture impressive yet functional, allowing the smoke to rise and drift away. The warmth of drink complements the heat of the fire, and together they stave off the winter's chill. His seat is habacked, carved with knotwork and depictions of beasts from myth. Imagine the evenings. Guests gathered, the hall filled with the low murmur of voices, punctuated by bursts of laughter. Their voices steady, rhythmic, almost hypnotic, perfect for the long dark winters, where the night lingers and the mind hungers for stories. The rhythmic clatter of the loom is steady, almost soothing, a domestic counterpoint to the warrior's boasts. Trenchers of bread, platters of cheese, and bowls of root vegetables accompany the feast. Protects against the elements, but also against the darker corners of solitude and isolation that winter can bring. The walls are thick, but the storms are thicker still. And so, the Longhouse is a bulwark, a place where warmth, companionship, and story push back against the cold. Offerings to the gods Odin, Thor, Freya might be quietly set by the hearth, or more elaborate sacrifices made outside when the seasons demand favor. Servants move gracefully through the hall, bearing wooden trays of roasted meats, perhaps lamb, pork, or fish caught and preserved from the last successful venture to sea. Cups of mead are passed hand to hand, golden, honeyed, slightly effervescent. The Jarl sits prominently near the hearth, adorned in a cloak of dyed wool, fastened with brooches of intricate design, perhaps silver, perhaps bronze. Here, decisions are made, alliances forged, disputes settled. The Jarl listens to his advisors, to visiting traders, to warriors eager for new raids or expeditions. Nearby, the women of the household tend to the weaving looms, spinning wool into thread, crafting the textiles that clothe the household and mark their status. The Longhouse is not just a home, it is the center of power, the heart of the community's social and political life. On certain nights, ritual observances take place here. Even within this space of relative luxury, the shadow of the harsh world outside is never far. Eventually the fires die lower, the voices soften, and sleep takes the hall. The Jarl, his family, his warriors and servants, wrapped in furs. Close to the embers drift into slumber, while outside, the wind continues to howl across the fjords and frozen ground. This was the other side of Viking life, not the bone-deep cold of the fishing village, nor the loneliness of distant voyages, but the guarded warmth of power, where memory, music, and myth kept the darkness at bay. And now, as our journey nears its end, let us step gently back from the Longhouse, past the embers, and into the quiet, where we may reflect on what is past. Imagine standing beneath a pale, hazy sky. The air is dry, carrying the fine dust of disturbed earth and crushed stone. Your lungs ache slightly with each breath. You are part of a vast, relentless workforce. A sea of men pressed into labor, gathered from villages, prisons, and battlefields. Some are conscript peasants taken from their farms. Others are soldiers, fulfilling imperial decrees. Many more are convicts, their punishments measured not in years, but in days of grueling, unceasing toil. You wake each morning to the cold kiss of dawn before the sun rises fully. Sleep is brief, restless, taken on thin mats or bare earth. The ground is hard, the nights cold or still. A bowl of thin millet porridge begins the day, barely enough to stave off the deep hunger that clings to your insides. Sometimes there is salted vegetable or a sliver of meat, but more often it is plain, bland, and insufficient than to work. The landscape is unforgiving. Sheer cliffs, steep ridges, loose soil. Stones must be quarried, hauled, shaped. Earth must be packed between wooden frames, layer upon layer, stomped down by feet, solidifying into rammed earth walls. There are no pulleys, no machines, just bodies. Your shoulders ache from the strain of carrying baskets of soil, your hands raw and cracked from binding reeds and tamping clay. Each stone is a burden, each step a trial. Overseers patrol with whips and rods, their voices harsh, their eyes sharp. They urge speed, efficiency, no tolerance for weakness. If you falter, you are beaten. If you fall, sometimes you are left behind. There is a saying among the laborers, "The wall eats men." For many, the phrase is not metaphorical. Those who perish whether from exhaustion, injury, or illness are sometimes buried within the wall itself, their bodies hidden, becoming part of the structure they helped create. An unmarked grave beneath layers of stone and earth. The weather offers no reprieve. In summer, the sun blazes without mercy, skin burning under its gaze. In winter, the wind cuts through even the thickest garments, its chill seeping into bones already weary and worn. Sleep brings little rest. The nights echo with the coughing of the sick, the mutterings of those dreaming fevered dreams, and the distant howls of wild animals. Disease spreads as dysentery, fevers, infections from untreated wounds. And yet the work must continue. Always another section to be raised, another ridge to conquer. Imagine your hands, calloused, split, bleeding, the skin beneath your fingernails dark with soil. Your body aches, your mind grows numb, each day blurring into the next. A monotony of labor, pain, and fleeting moments of reprieve. And still, the wall rises. Mile after mile, stone by stone, etched into the very spine of the land. You wonder, do the emperors know? Do they feel the weight of each life expended in their name? But the emperor is distant, his face unseen, his decrees carried by messengers who do not stay to watch. Your world is here, beneath the weight of stone, under the watchful eyes of overseers, amidst the dust and the cold. And in this endless labor, a question lingers. Who is this emperor, whose commands stretched so far, whose vision demanded so much? Let us now turn our gaze away from the wall itself and towards its most infamous patron, the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, whose ambitions knew no bounds. Now, let us travel back to the heart of power itself, to the imperial court of Qin Shi Huang, the man whose command raised the Great Wall, and whose will unified the many warring states of ancient China. Imagine yourself walking through the imposing corridors of his palace. Stone underfoot, banners hanging from timber beams, each marked with the black and white emblems of the Qin. The air inside is cooler, shaded from the sun, but there is little softness here. Only the quiet echo of footsteps and the low murmur of officials conferring in hushed tones. Qin Shi Huang, born Ying Xing, became king of Qin at just 13. But even as a youth, his authority was absolute. He matured into a man of relentless ambition, driven by the belief that all under heaven should be unified under his rule. And so he did what no one before had accomplished. He conquered the 6 rival states that fragmented the land, bringing them under a single imperial banner. His armies marched across valleys, rivers, and mountains, meting out swift and often brutal subjugation. When his conquest was complete, Ying Zhang declared himself Shuang the First Emperor, a title with no precedent. As though he stood apart from and above all who had come before, unification brought not only new borders, but standardization. A single system of weights and measures, standardized currency, a unified written script across all provinces. Imagine the scrolls and tablets of the scribes, carefully inscribing these new laws, creating the shared language of empire. Yet the emperor's desire for control extended beyond mere governance. He was deeply paranoid, wary of dissent, of scholars who might question his decrees, of traditions that threatened unity. This paranoia led to one of his most infamous acts, the burning of books and burying of scholars. Texts that challenged his authority, philosophical works, historical records were ordered destroyed. Some scholars who resisted or criticized the regime were allegedly buried alive or executed. Our knowledge was to serve the emperor's vision. The past was rewritten, the future made to conform. Beyond control, Qin Shi Huang sought immortality. He feared death, sending expeditions in search of the elixir of life, pursuing alchemists and magicians who promised longevity. But these promises remained unfulfilled. Even in his lifetime, he commissioned grand projects. Massive palaces, networks of roads, and of course, the Great Wall, an enduring bulwark against the northern tribes he feared. He traveled widely across his empire, sometimes incognito, to inspect his lands and ensure loyalty. But the further he traveled, the more restless he became, haunted by the inevitability of mortality. In the end, death claimed him far from the capital. His entourage concealed his passing for weeks, fearing instability should the news spread too soon. They disguised the smell of his decaying body with carts of salted fish, a grim detail of history softened by the quiet certainty that even emperors cannot escape the passage of time. Yet Qin Shi Huang's legacy was sealed not just in walls or laws, but in the grand tomb he had built for himself, a resting place so vast, so elaborately guarded that it remains largely unexcavated even today. To explore that tomb and its silent protectors, we must descend beneath the earth, where an army of clay stands in eternal formation, awaiting a master who will never rise again. Now let us descend into the soft red earth of Shanxi province, to the quiet plains near the ancient capital of Shanyang. Beneath the soil, silent and still, stood an army, forgotten by time until the chance discovery by farmers in 1974 brought the world's gaze to a buried wonder. The Terracotta Army. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the first excavation pit. Before you, rows upon rows of clay warriors stretch out in disciplined formation. Each figure stands life-sized, about 6 feet tall, with distinct facial features, hairstyles, and armor. No two faces are quite the same, as if each warrior had once lived a life of his own. Though all are bound forever in fired clay, their purpose was clear: to guard the tomb of Qin Shi Huang in the afterlife, to ensure the emperor's dominion extended beyond death itself. Here in the stillness of the burial chambers, you can almost hear the faint echo of marching footsteps, the creak of wooden chariots, the low hum of preparation for a battle that would never come. Yet the army is only the beginning. The emperor's mausoleum itself remains largely untouched. Ancient texts describe a vast underground palace, complete with flowing rivers of mercury, engineered to represent the geography of his empire. Mountains fashioned from bronze, stars depicted with precious stones. There are tales of deadly traps, crossbows rigged to fire upon intruders, poison canals designed to preserve the sanctity of the tomb. Modern science lends some support to these legends. Soil tests around the unexcavated mound reveal unusually high levels of mercury, hinting that the old accounts may hold truth. Still, the heart of the tomb remains sealed. Archaeologists proceed with caution, fearing that excavation might cause irreparable damage, that exposure to air and light might erase delicate remnants that have survived to millennia underground. So the emperor lies undisturbed, his secrets, safe for now, watched over by his silent army of clay. Archers, infantry, cavalry, their hands once grasping now decayed wooden weapons. Nearby, additional pits reveal acrobats, musicians, and officials, each sculpted in attentive detail, as if ready to serve the emperor in both governance and leisure. The scale of it all is almost incomprehensible. Thousands of artisans, potters, and laborers dedicating years to the construction of this necropolis, ensuring that Qin Shi Huang's afterlife would mirror his imperial court in every respect. And yet, for all its grandeur, the tomb is a monument to a singular fear: the emperor's dread of death and the desire to control even the unknown. Above the tomb, the landscape is quiet once more. Grasses grow, winds whisper over the earthen mound, and beneath, the terracotta army waits in silence. While the laborers who toiled on the wall perished in obscurity, these clay figures endure an immortal guard for a man who could not accept mortality. But not all in ancient China lived in such shadowy grandeur or suffered in unmarked graves. Far from the tomb, within the palace walls of the Han dynasty that followed, life took on a different texture, of silk, ritual, and refinement. Let us now cross the centuries, stepping into the imperial court of the Han, where power moved with grace, and life was marked not by toil, but by the subtle games of influence and tradition. Now we find ourselves amidst the refinement of the Han dynasty, where life within the imperial court offered a striking contrast to the harsh realities of wall builders and buried soldiers of clay. Red lacquered beams in carefully tended gardens. The air is fragrant with the scent of blossoming plum trees and incense wafting gently from shrines. Inside the grand halls, silk draperies hang gracefully, their colors vivid yet harmonious deep reds. Muted golds, the soft sheen of jade green. Attendants move softly across polished floors, their footsteps muffled by woven mats. The Han emperors, inheritors of the Qin legacy, ruled with a blend of Confucian ideals and imperial authority. Their court was a place of elaborate ritual, where every gesture, every word, followed precise etiquette. The emperor, a figure both revered and remote, was the son of heaven, his presence alone thought to maintain harmony between the cosmos and the realm. He occupied the heart of the court, his days a tapestry of audiences, ceremonies, and private contemplation. Court officials gathered in the Hall of Light, a space of quiet grandeur where petitions were read, policy debated, and decrees issued. Their robes, adorned with rank insignias, fluttered as they bowed deeply before the throne. Beyond the political sphere, life in the palace hummed with artistic pursuits. Musicians played stringed instruments like the guqin, producing soft, contemplative tones that echoed gently through the halls. Poets composed verses, celebrating nature, duty, and the changing seasons, their lines delicate as brushstrokes on silk scrolls. Banquets were a display of the empire's wealth and the court's refinement. Imagine long, low tables set with porcelain dishes, offering delicacies such as steamed fish, roasted duck, pickled vegetables, and fragrant rice. Attendants poured wine into bronze cups, the liquid perfumed with spices and herbs. In the glow of candlelight, dancers performed with flowing sleeves and measured grace, each movement designed to please both the eye and the spirit. Yet beneath this beauty lay a subtle undercurrent of intrigue. Empresses, consorts, eunuchs, and ministers navigated a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions. One wrong word, one misstep, could mean exile or worse. Still, life continued in rhythm with the seasons. The palace grounds offered quiet spaces, pavilions overlooking lotus ponds, groves of bamboo that whispered with the wind. Here, scholars gathered for philosophical discourse, debating Confucian ethics, reciting ancient classics, or composing calligraphy with brushes dipped in ink. The garments of the elite reflected their status, fine silks embroidered with gold thread, hair styled in intricate fashions, ornaments of jade and pearl. Such elegance stood in stark contrast to the rough-spun tunics of the laborers who once built the wall, or the clay soldiers entombed with Qin Shi Huang. Yet whether within these gilded halls or upon the dusty plains, all lived beneath the same sky, bound by the same mortal span of years. The court of the Han, with all its refinements, offered a life far removed from toil, but not from the inexorable passage of time. Even the most splendid silks eventually fray, and even the grandest palaces weather with age. As we leave the imperial court behind, let us step softly back into the quiet of night, where the echoes of music, poetry, and footsteps grow faint. Imagine yourself waking up on a humid summer morning in a small village nestled between the hills of Kyushu, or perhaps Honshu. The air is already heavy with moisture, and the thatched roof above you offers little protection from the dampness that clings to everything. You rise before the sun fully clears the horizon. There's no choice. The fields await, and your duty is clear. The rice paddies, glistening with shallow water, stretch beyond the edge of the village like endless mirrors of the sky. You gather your simple tools, a wooden hoe, a straw hat to ward off the sun, and a woven basket to carry seedlings. The soil beneath the water is soft but treacherous, a constant tug against your feet. Your hands sink into the mud again and again, planting row after row of rice shoots, each one placed with precision to ensure the crop will thrive, but the task is endless. The days blur together, weeding, planting, repairing dikes and channels. Even a moment's lapse can lead to weeds overtaking the precious crop, or a flood destroying weeks of effort. The sun rises higher, its glare reflected off the water's surface, creating a dizzying, shimmering heat that presses against your skin. You sweat through rough-spun garments that chafe at the seams, but there is no respite. And then, there are the taxes. You do not own the land. It belongs to the local daimyo, feudal lord who demands a portion of your harvest as payment for his protection, and for his standing in the eyes of his superiors. The tax collectors arrive without fail, counting bundles of rice with sharp eyes, taking their due with little regard for your own needs. Poor harvest, an early frost, these are your misfortunes alone. The taxes remain unchanged. You live with the ever-present shadow of the samurai, the warrior class that upholds the daimyo's power. Though tales speak of their honor in practice, a passing samurai may treat you with disdain, your life regarded as insignificant. A brief obstacle on the path of a mounted horse. There is also the fear of conscription. When wars stir between rival lords, even peasants may be rounded up. Armed with spears or farming tools, thrust into conflicts they neither understand nor control. Your meals are simple and repetitive rice. If you're fortunate, often mixed with millet or barley to stretch it further. Pickled vegetables, miso soup, and on rare days a bit of fish or wild greens. Meat is scarce, not only by circumstance, but by Buddhist-influenced custom. Your home is a narrow hut of wood in red, drafty in winter, stifling in summer. At night, you sleep on mats laid upon the floor, listening to the sounds of insects, the occasional distant howl of a wolf, and the muffled sighs of family members equally worn from the day's toil. Festivals come, brightening the gloom with brief moments of music, colorful banners, and the distant rumble of taiko drums. But these are fleeting, and the next morning the fields beckon once more. The rhythm of your life is dictated by the land, planting in spring, tending through summer, harvesting in autumn, surviving the cold grip of winter. And so season after season, the struggle continues. There is no promise of elevation, no dream of escape, only the endurance of another day. Yet while you labor in the mud and sun, powerful men move pieces across the board of Japan's future. One such man, ruthless and brilliant, begins to stir the islands into a storm of unification. His name is Oda Nobunaga. Let us now leave behind the humble peasant's field and step onto the battlegrounds of ambition where warlords dream of unifying a fractured land. It is the Sengoku period, an era of warring states, where Japan is a patchwork of territories ruled by rival daimyo, each vying for supremacy. Among these lords emerges a figure both feared and admired, Oda Nobunaga. Born in 1534 in the province of Owari, Nobunaga grew up amid the constant clang of steel, where loyalty was scarce and betrayal a familiar currency. From the beginning, Nobunaga stood apart. He was brash, unconventional, known in his youth for behavior that scandalized the strict codes of his peers. Yet beneath this reputation lay a calculating mind, one that understood power not as a static inheritance, but as something to be seized, forged and wielded like a blade. When his father died, Nobunaga inherited leadership of his clan, though many doubted his capability. Still, he moved swiftly to consolidate control, defeating rivals within his own family, eliminating threats before they could fester. He recognized that warfare was changing. While other lords clung to the samurai's sword and bow, Nobunaga embraced firearms. The arquebus, introduced by the Portuguese. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, he famously deployed lines of gunners behind wooden stockades, unleashing volleys that decimated the famed cavalry of the Takeda clan. It was not just his methods that marked him, but his ruthlessness. When he captured enemy castles, he made examples of resistance, crushing opposition with uncompromising force. Yet he also rewarded loyalty generously, elevating those who served him well, regardless of their origins. One of his most dramatic moments came with the capture of Kyoto, the ancient imperial capital. By installing the Ashikaga shogun, Nobunaga gained nominal legitimacy, but all knew where real power resided. Temples that opposed him, such as the militant Buddhist sect at Mount Hiei, were met with fire and destruction. Nobunaga did not tolerate divided loyalties. To him, unity was worth any cost. Go still, as with many who rise so high, betrayal awaited. In 1582, while resting at the Honnoji Temple in Kyoto, he was ambushed by his own general, Akechi Mitsuhide. Trapped and outnumbered, Nobunaga chose not to flee. Instead, he committed ritual suicide, a final act of defiance against the fate imposed upon him. His death sent shockwaves across the land, but his vision endured. His successors, notably Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu, continued the work of unification, fulfilling the path Nobunaga had carved with steel and strategy. Today, Nobunaga is remembered as both tyrant and visionary, a man who broke the old to forge the new. Where peasants labored in obscurity, he reshaped the very map of Japan, leaving a legacy that echoed long beyond his fall. Yet while warlords vied for control, there were corners of Japan untouched by their conflicts, remote places where different peoples, with distinct traditions and ways of life, continued much as they had for centuries. Among them were the Ainu, an indigenous culture shrouded in mystery and resilience. Let us now journey far to the northern edges of the Japanese archipelago, to the misty forests and rugged coastlines of Hokkaido, where the air carries the sharp scent of pine and salt, and the wind whispers through tall grasses and lichen-covered stones. Here lived the Ainu, a distinct and ancient people whose origins trace back millennia, and whose way of life remained uniquely separate from that of the Japanese mainland. Imagine waking in an Ainu village, a cluster of huts made from reeds and bark, their roofs sloping sharply to cast off the snow that blankets this land in winter. Central hearth glows with quiet embers, its smoke curling gently up through a vent, scented faintly with the aroma of smoked fish and burning alder wood. The Ainu lived in harmony with their environment, depending on the rivers for salmon, the forests for deer and bear, and the seas for abundant fish and seaweed. Their tools made from wood, bone, and stone were finely crafted, each suited to the tasks of hunting, fishing, and daily life. Clothing was woven from the fibers of the elm tree, decorated with intricate patterns believed to ward off evil spirits. These garments, known as atis, were practical against the chill of northern winds, and carried cultural significance as symbols of craftsmanship and identity. At the heart of Ainu spirituality was a profound respect for nature, an animistic belief that kami, or spirits, resided within every element of the world, from the mighty bear to the smallest pebble. Ceremonies were held to honor these spirits, chief among them the Iomonte, a ritual that involved the ceremonial sending of a bear spirit back to the realm of the gods. To the outsider, these practices seemed mysterious, but to the Ainu, they represented a balanced coexistence with the world around them.
Ow.
Their songs, known as a popo, and their dances told stories passed down through generations. Stories of creation, of nature's bounty, and of the spirits that guided their fate. Yet despite their rich culture, the Ainu lived in the shadow of expanding Japanese influence. By the Edo period, efforts to assimilate or displace them became more pronounced, especially as Japan sought to exert control over Hokkaido. Trade, often unequal, brought new goods but also eroded traditional practices. Even their language, distinct from Japanese, began to fade, with fewer and fewer speakers surviving into the modern age. Today, much of Ainu history survives through archaeological findings, and the Eltro traditions and the efforts of cultural preservationists. Excavations of Ainu sites revealed tools, ceremonial objects, and the remains of their ancient dwellings. Silent testimonies to a way of life shaped by patience, adaptation, and reverence for the land. Though much about the Ainu remains obscured by time and neglect, their legacy endures. A reminder of Japan's complex cultural tapestry, where not all threads follow the same pattern. From these northern shores, we return now to the heart of power in feudal Japan, where castles stood as both fortresses and palaces, and where the elite lived lives of ritual, luxury, and order far removed from the toil of peasants or the fading traditions of the Ainu. Now, let us pass through the imposing gates of a samurai castle, built not only for defense, but as a testament to status, power, and architectural elegance. Picture the tall stone walls, meticulously stacked without mortar, each stone chosen and shaped to interlock securely, resistant to siege and time. Above these walls rise timber structures with sweeping tiled roofs, each corner curved upwards as though reaching for the sky. You walk along a winding path deliberately designed to confuse intruders, a maze of gates, sharp turns, and watchful guards. But with the right permission, you ascend further into the complex. Passing manicured gardens where koi fish glide beneath water lilies and pine trees are pruned into perfect shapes. At the heart of the castle stands the tenshu, or main keep, a tall, commanding tower of white plaster walls and dark wooden beams. Inside, The air is cool and quiet. Tatami mats soft beneath your feet. The scent of hinoki cypress wood lingering in the background. Here live the daimyo, the feudal lord, and his family, surrounded by retainers, samurai, and servants. The rooms are separated by sliding screens of painted rice paper, adorned with images of cranes, cherry blossoms, and landscapes fading into mist. The daimyo holds court here, receiving guests and issuing commands, his presence marked by careful rituals of bowing and speech. Every gesture is deliberate, every word weighed with propriety. Meals are an affair of quiet ceremony. Low lacquered tables are arranged with an array of delicacies, grilled fish, rice pickles, delicate slices of sashimi, and small cups of sake served with precision. Entertainment might include the refined strains of the koto, a 13-stringed instrument plucked gently to produce serene, resonant tones, or a performance of no theater, where masked actors move in slow, deliberate motions, their voices low and haunting, weaving tales of spirits and honor. The daimyo's wife and daughters might engage in the tea ceremony, a meditative practice where every movement, from the folding of cloth to the whisking of green tea, is an expression of mindfulness and grace. Behind these rituals lies the strict code of Bushido, the way of the warrior, demanding loyalty, discipline, and honor unto death. Samurai within the castle live under this code, their days filled with martial training, calligraphy, and the study of philosophy. Beyond the walls, peasants labor, merchants trade, and artisans craft. But here, life moves at a different pace. Calm, ordered, yet always alert to the shifting tides of power. At night, the castle quiets, corridors dimly lit by paper lanterns. The distant sound of a night watchman tapping wooden clappers to mark the hour. Within the Lord's chamber, painted screens shimmer in the low light, while outside the wind brushes against the stone walls. Carrying the distant scent of pine and the soft rustle of leaves. And so ends our journey from muddy fields to gilded halls, from the burdens of the peasant to the privileges of the elite, all bound together in the same tapestry of feudal Japan. A land of enduring contrasts, of hardship and grace, of discipline and beauty. Close your eyes and picture it. The pale light of early morning filtering through the mist, the earthy scent of damp soil heavy in the air, and the crunch of uneven stones beneath your feet. You are a pilgrim now, leaving behind your village, your family, perhaps forever. Your destination might be Canterbury, to the shrine of Thomas Becket, or further still, to the grand cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, where the bones of St. James are said to rest. But the road stretches long and unforgiving. There are no smooth highways, only rutted dirt tracks, quick to become seas of mud with a turn of the weather. Each step is slow, your feet wrapped in rough cloth, sometimes simple leather, offering little protection against stones, thorns, or the creeping cold that settles deep into your bones. You carry what you can: a flask of water, perhaps a strip of salted meat, a hard blackened piece of bread. When it rains, and it often does, your clothes cling, sodden and heavy, and the chill bites into your skin. There is no escape from the elements, only the distant promise of an inn, if you can afford it. In those inns, crowded and low-ceilinged, you find no peace. The air is thick with the mingled scents of sweat, smoke, and sour ale. You might share your sleeping space with strangers, merchants, thieves, and other pilgrims, all packed tightly on dirt floors strewn with straw that conceals as many fleas as it does dust. And then there are the dangers along the road itself. Bandits lurk in forested passes, knowing well that pilgrims are vulnerable, their few coins or a small token or relic, enough incentive to risk an ambush. If not bandits, then there are illnesses. Maladies born of fatigue, poor food, and exposure. Blisters become infected, wounds fester, and the ever-present risk of fevers claims many before their journey's end. The food you find is little better, a thin broth at best, stale bread. Sometimes a pungent cheese whose origins you might best not question. Meat is rare, and when it appears, it is often salted beyond recognition, chewy and tough. Pilgrims also travel in groups when they can, not just for safety, but for company, and for the shared rhythm of walking, singing hymns or reciting prayers to pass the time. But even then, arguments arise. tempers fray, and the weakest fall behind. At night, if no shelter is to be found, you sleep beneath the stars, the ground cold and unyielding beneath your back. Your cloak thin, the sound of distant wolves, a reminder of the wildness that still claimed much of the land. You might carry a tocana badge or a symbol marking your destination, a shell for Santiago, or a lead badge of Becket's shrine. These are your credentials, proof of your devotion, but also a target for those who would take it from you. Yet amidst all this, there are fleeting moments of beauty. The sun rising golden over fields of wheat, the sound of a distant bell calling to morning prayer, the kindness of a stranger who shares their meager food. Still, the road is long, its hardships steady and unrelenting. And as you trudge forward, step after step, the rhythm of your own weary breathing becomes a quiet companion. This is the life of a medieval pilgrim, not the romanticized march of saints, but a grinding, aching, earthy reality. But some made it step after painful step. And some made the journey not just once, but many times, driven by faith, by visions, or by an unyielding desire to find meaning in suffering. Among these was a woman whose name would echo through history. A woman whose travels defied the expectations of her time, and whose voice, recorded in one of the earliest autobiographies, still speaks across the centuries. Let us now turn to Marjorie Kemp and follow her strange, emotional, and tireless pilgrimage. As we leave behind the weary figure of Marjorie Kemp, let us now shift our gaze to what so many pilgrims, whether fervent or merely hopeful, sought on their long and dusty roads: the relics. Relics in the medieval world held a power that was both tangible and ethereal. To hold a bone, a scrap of cloth, or a splinter of wood that was believed to have touched the divine. This was no mere token. It was a connection, a bridge between the mortal world and the sacred. And so, pilgrims traveled hundreds, even thousands of miles, to glimpse a reliquary, to kneel before a shrine, to be in the presence of bones said to have belonged to saints, martyrs, or even the apostles themselves. Consider for a moment the shrine of St. James at Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Here, in the great cathedral, lay the bones believed to belong to James the Greater, one of Christ's 12 apostles. The journey to Santiago, known as the Camino, was long, arduous, and often dangerous. But the promise of standing before the relics, of gaining a spiritual indulgence, was enough to drive countless feet forward. Similarly, the bones of St. Cuthbert in England, enshrined at Durham Cathedral, drew pilgrims from across the British Isles. His remains were said to be incorruptible, his body miraculously preserved, a sign of his sainthood. Yet, beneath the layers of piety and devotion, there was another story, that of the relic trade. Relics were not only objects of reverence, they were also commodities. Monasteries, churches, and even cities competed to possess the most prestigious, the most miraculous relics. For with relics came pilgrims, and with pilgrims came wealth. Imagine the quiet halls of a monastery, where monks diligently cared for their treasures. Relics were housed in ornate reliquaries, boxes of gold, silver, and enamel, often shaped like the bones they contained. A finger bone might be encased in a gilded finger-shaped case, a skull in a precious bust, and was said to be from the true cross, set with jewels. The authenticity of these relics, however, was often questionable. In the bustling markets of the Middle Ages, it was possible to purchase fragments of bone, splinters of wood, or pieces of cloth, all purported to be sacred. But who could truly say whether a bone belonged to a saint or simply to a long-forgotten villager? There are accounts of unscrupulous merchants selling the same relic many times over, or inventing miraculous origins for ordinary items. Yet the faithful rarely questioned these claims, for belief itself was a kind of power. If the pilgrim believed in the relic, then the relic, in turn, bestowed grace. Relics were not always confined to bones either. There were the holy thorn, said to have come from Christ's crown, the holy foreskin claimed by several churches, and the Holy Grail, though its presence was shrouded more in legend than certainty. And of course, the Shroud of Turin, purported to bear the image of Christ himself, continues to intrigue scholars and the devout alike, though its origins remain debated. The cult of relics shaped not just piety, but the very geography of the medieval world. Towns grew wealthy from pilgrimage traffic. Roads were carved through forests and across rivers, lined with shrines, chapels, and markets catering to the weary traveler. At every shrine, the pilgrim might find a chance to purchase a pilgrim badge, a small token of lead or pewter, depicting the saint or the symbol of the shrine, to pin to their cloak or hat as proof of their journey. Many of these badges have been unearthed by archaeologists, often bent, weathered, lost in the mud of ancient roads. Thus, the relics of the Middle Ages were more than mere objects. They were conduits of faith, sources of wealth, and even instruments of political power. To possess a relic was to command attention and to inspire awe. As we step quietly away from the glitter of reliquaries and the bone-filled shrines, let us ascend in our minds to the great halls of the nobility, those who feasted and celebrated. Far removed from the pilgrim's grime and exhaustion, there, amidst the glow of candlelight, roasted meats, and the soft strains of minstrels, life unfolded in opulence, even as peasants and pilgrims trudged through the mud below. Now, dear listener, let us leave behind the muck-laden roads, the fragile bones of saints, and the heavy sighs of pilgrims. Instead, imagine yourself climbing a gentle hill, where atop stands a grand stone hall, its walls thick and cool, its narrow windows aglow with candlelight. Here in this hall resides a medieval noble, a lord or lady of considerable standing, surrounded by retinues of servants, knights, and companions of status. It is a world apart from the common folk, a place of privilege, ceremony, and indulgence. The Great Hall itself is the heart of this world. Long wooden tables stretch across its length, lined with benches worn smooth from use. Overhead, a timbered roof vaults high, darkened by years of smoke from open hearths. Banners and tapestries hang from the walls, depicting heraldic beasts, scenes of chivalry, and family crests. At the center burns a great fire, its flames crackling gently, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow. The scent of roasting meats, spiced wine, and fragrant herbs hangs in the air, a rich and comforting aroma. This is the setting for a feast, a display of wealth, hospitality, and power. Imagine yourself seated at a bench, a rough yet sturdy table before you, upon which trenchers thick slabs of stale bread serve as plates. These trenchers absorb the juices of meats and sauces to be eaten by the hungry or discarded to the poor. The meal unfolds in courses, each one a procession of abundance. First, a variety of breads and cheeses, accompanied by butter and honey, then perhaps a pottage. A thick stew of grains, vegetables, and bits of meat or fish. Soon follow the roasts, venison from the forests, boar's head adorned with apples. Game birds like pheasants and partridges, their feathers sometimes reaffixed for decoration. There are pies filled with eels, spiced lamprey, and delicate pastries shaped like animals. Spices like cinnamon, ginger, and cloves, luxuries brought from distant lands, flavor these dishes, signaling the Lord's wealth. To drink, there is ale and mead, but also wine, imported at great cost from southern vineyards. For the highest in rank, there may even be hippocras, a spiced and sweetened wine served at the feast's end. Between courses, entertainment delights the gathering. Minstrels strum lutes and harps, their voices weaving songs of love, battle, and courtly intrigue. Jugglers and jesters caper and jest, eliciting chuckles with clever quips and playful antics. Storytellers recount the sagas of King Arthur, of Charlemagne, or ancient Roman heroes, their voices rising and falling like the gentle swell of a lullaby. At the high table, the lord and lady preside, surrounded by their honored guests. Their garments are rich. Velvets, brocades, and furs line their collars. Jewels catch the firelight, sparkling with each graceful gesture. Yet, this splendor is carefully structured. Every guest has a place according to their rank, their proximity to the Lord reflecting their importance. Manners and etiquette are observed with precision. How to sit, how to speak, how to lift a goblet, all carefully governed by custom. In the winter, the feast is accompanied by warmth from the central hearth, but in summer, the heavy air carries the scent of bodies, mingled with herbs strewn across the floors to mask odors. And when the feasting draws to a close, the tables are cleared, the bones and crumbs swept away, the trenchers gathered.
Guests.
Retire to side chambers, where pallets of straw and cloth offer what comfort they can. Some may remain in the hall itself, sleeping near the fire, beneath the watchful eyes of the household retainers. Beyond the walls, the village peasants still labor in the fields, and pilgrims shuffle along distant roads. But here, in the glow of wealth and power, life feels insulated from the struggles below. This was the rhythm of the medieval nobles' hall, an oasis of privilege in a harsh world, where status was both displayed and reinforced with every bite, every song, every carefully measured courtesy. And so, as the candles gutter low and the hall settles into darkness, imagine the quiet, the crackle of cooling embers, the distant hoot of an owl beyond the stone walls. A night's peace, however fleeting, settles over the hall. Soon it will be morning, and with it the endless march of life. For pilgrim, peasant, and noble alike, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a great open expanse. The land stretches before you, flat and endless. Under a sun that rises quickly, burning away any lingering coolness of the night, you are part of a caravan, a long train of camels, each loaded with bales of silk, bundles of spices, blocks of jade, or other precious goods destined for distant lands. Your duty is simple, but relentless. Walk, guide, cajole the camels, and keep moving forward. The camels themselves are odd companions. They sway with each step, their heavy-lidded eyes indifferent, their humps bobbing gently. Their breath smells faintly of old hay and dust, and their coarse fur is streaked with sand. They groan, grunt, and sometimes refuse to budge. Their stubbornness is much a part of the journey as the sand underfoot. The trail is not a smooth one. Underfoot, the earth may shift from packed dirt to loose sand, from rocky plains to salt-crusted flats. Your sandals grow thin, your feet blistered, the rhythm of each step a dull throb in your legs. By midday, the sun is merciless. It presses down, heavy and unrelenting, drawing sweat that quickly dries, leaving a film of salt on your skin. Your throat feels parched. Your lips crack, and every sip of water must be rationed carefully. There are sandstorms, when the wind rises suddenly, whipping the air into a choking haze. Grains of sand find their way into your mouth, your nose, your clothes, scraping at your skin like tiny needles. You wrap cloth around your face, but it is never enough. Then there are the nights, when the sun vanishes and the desert grows cold, bitingly so. You wrap yourself in coarse blankets, press close to the animals for warmth, and watch the stars wheel overhead, unmoving in their ancient constellations. Sleep is fitful, on ground that is never soft. There is always a stone pressing into your side, a distant howl of wind or wolf, a restless camel shifting nearby. And always there is the worry of bandits. Hidden among dunes or rocks, they wait for an unwary caravan ready to strike. The caravan master keeps guards and sentries, but there is always risk of theft, violence, or worse. Food is sparse. Flatbreads that grow dry and stale, dried meat that tastes of salt and grit, and the occasional dried fruit that provides a fleeting sweetness. Yet, amid the hardship, there are small beauties. The endless horizon at dawn, when the sky blushes pink and gold, the cool stillness of early morning, when the air feels momentarily kind, the quiet companionship of fellow travelers whose songs and stories pass the long hours. And the camels, for all their stubbornness, are reliable, their soft footfalls the heartbeat of the journey. This is the rhythm of the Silk Road, step after step, mile after mile, day after unchanging day. So you walk, watching the horizon, always distant, always beckoning. As the caravan presses onward, as we leave behind the daily grind of the camel handler, let us shift our gaze to a traveler of greater renown, whose name has become almost synonymous with the Silk Road itself, Marco Polo. Imagine him now. A young Venetian merchant setting out not with a single caravan but with the weight of curiosity, commerce, and ambition. It was the year 1271 when Marco Polo, only 17 years of age, embarked on his great journey, traveled not alone, but in the company of his father, his uncle Maffeo. Seasoned merchants already familiar with the distant courts of the East, their journey would stretch over 20 years, carrying them far beyond the borders of Europe, across the Middle East, through Persia, over the formidable Pamir Mountains, and deep into the heart of Asia. One can imagine the young Marco, perhaps overwhelmed by the immensity of the landscapes, the unfamiliar customs, and the dizzying array of languages and beliefs encountered along the way. There were the ancient cities of Persia, their markets alive with noise and color. There were desert crossings, like the haunting passage through the Gobi Desert, where the heat by day was punishing, and the cold at night bone-chilling. Marco would have seen the play of mirages on the horizon, phantoms of water that tempted thirsty travelers in the endless expanses of sand. He spoke of strange tales told by others on the trail, of spirits that lured men to their doom, of deserts where the wind carried the voices of the lost and wandering.
Oh.
Then there were the mountains, the Pamirs, sometimes called the roof of the world, where thin air made every breath a conscious effort. The snow here was perpetual, the passes narrow, and the trails often treacherous with ice and loose rock. Through these trials, the Polos pressed on, driven by their desire to reach the court of the great Kublai Khan, the Mongol emperor who ruled vast territories from China to the Middle East. When at last they arrived at Kublai Khan's court in what is now known as Beijing, they were received with curiosity and interest. The Khan, fascinated by the distant lands of Europe, found favor in the educated and articulate Venetians. Marco Polo, with his keen eye for detail, served at the Khan's court. Traveling as an envoy to regions as varied as Burma, Tibet, and the borders of India, his descriptions of cities, cultures, and technologies were meticulously gathered, not in writing at the time, but in memory, to be recounted years later upon his return to Venice. Marco marveled at the grandeur of cities like Khanbalik, the capital of the Yuan dynasty, with its palaces, its canals, and the bustling markets filled with silks, spices, and porcelain. He described paper money, a marvel to European ears, and the efficiency of the imperial postal system. Stations spaced along the roads, fresh horses awaiting messengers to ensure swift communication across the empire. Yet, for all his observations of splendor, the journey home was just as arduous. The Polos took a sea route, sailing from China's coast, navigating dangerous waters, braving storms, and passing through the territories of the Indian Ocean. Many of their companions succumbed to illness, shipwreck, or the toll of exhaustion. But Marco and his family survived to reach Persia and then back across familiar ground to Venice. Upon their return, their tales seemed so extraordinary that some doubted their truth.
Ouch!
Indeed. Marco Polo's accounts later compiled in his book, The Travels of Marco Polo. Read like a compendium of wonders, yet embedded within them are valuable glimpses of a vast and connected world, where goods, ideas, and people flowed along the great arteries of trade. It is easy to imagine Marco, perhaps older and wearied, recounting these adventures by the hearth, the flicker of the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, as listeners leaned in, entranced by the stories of distant Cathay, the Great Khan, and the endless, perilous Silk Road. And so, with the dust of travel still in our minds, we turn our attention not to the tales told by men, but to the silent witnesses of the Silk Road's history, the ancient cities now buried by sand, waiting quietly beneath the dunes. Now, dear listener, let us continue our gentle journey, not along the well-trodden paths of caravans, but into the shifting sands of time itself. Here, in the heart of Central Asia, the Taklamakan Desert lies vast and brooding, a great sea of dunes that stretches as far as the eye can see, silent, treacherous, and yet holding beneath its sands the remnants of forgotten cities. Imagine standing on the edge of this desert. The air is dry, each breath tinged with dust. Wind hisses softly over the dunes, lifting fine grains of sand that sting the skin and blur the horizon. Yet hidden somewhere beyond these veils of shifting earth are the bones of cities that once thrived on trade, culture, and faith. The Taklamakan is sometimes called the Desert of No Return, a name well earned. Travelers who strayed too far from their route, or whose caravans faltered, could vanish without a trace, swallowed by the endless sands. But along its edges and oases, a network of towns once flourished. Stepping stones for those daring to cross between the realms of East and West. Perhaps the most famous among these is Lulen, an ancient city that once stood near the dried remains of Lopnor Lake. More than 2 millennia ago, Lulen was a bustling hub, a critical junction where the Silk Road split into its northern and southern branches. Merchants stopped here to rest, to trade, and to refill their precious water supplies. Yet Lulen's fortune was fragile. Over centuries, the shifting courses of rivers, climate changes, and the encroaching desert spelled its doom. By the 4th century CE, Lulen was abandoned, its walls crumbling, its houses reclaimed by sand. When explorers from the West began venturing into the Taklamakan in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they rediscovered Lulen's remains. They uncovered wooden beams, textiles still bearing faint colors, and manuscripts inscribed in multiple languages. Evidence of a multicultural society at the crossroads of empires. Imagine the soft crunch of ancient wood beneath a careful boot, the faint traces of a wall that once encircled a vibrant community. Nearby, fragments of pottery still cling to their delicate patterns, as if the artisan's hands had just laid them down to dry. Another of the desert's secrets is Naya, an oasis town along the southern route of the Silk Road. Nia's ruins reveal a settlement rich in agrarian life. Wooden houses, orchards, and irrigation canals that defied the desert's hunger. Clay tablets from Nia tell of daily transactions, tax records, and even personal letters. voices from the past, speaking softly across the centuries. There is something intimate in these preserved records. A request for more wine, a dispute over land boundaries, an account of a marriage. They remind us that these lost cities were not just stops for trade, but homes for real people, farmers, artisans, scribes, living and striving as we do today. Further west along the desert's rim lay Khotan, famed for its jade and silk. Though not buried like Lulen, Khotan thrived for centuries as a beacon of wealth and culture, its artisans producing silk. Long before the secret of its making escaped China's borders. These cities were not just economic centers, they were cultural melting pots. Buddhism flowed along these routes, carried by monks and pilgrims who established monasteries and carved statues deep into the cliffs of nearby regions. Like the Mogao caves of Dunhuang, these caves, adorned with murals and statues, stand as an enduring gallery of devotion, artistry, and exchange. The murals depict travelers, celestial beings, and glimpses of life along the Silk Road. A visual testament to the blend of cultures that the road fostered. But the desert is a patient force. Even as these cities rose in splendor, the sands encroached. Climate shifts reduced rivers to trickles, oases dried up, and trade routes shifted. In time, the Taklamakan swallowed many of these places whole, preserving them in a dry embrace to be uncovered only by those who dared to look. Today, archaeologists still venture into these remote areas, brushing away centuries of sand to reveal timbered walls, textiles, and the brittle remains of everyday life. Each discovery adds a quiet voice to the chorus of history, reminding us that beneath the surface of the desert, the past slumbers, waiting for the patient hand to wake it once more. And as we emerge from the silent ruins of the Taklamakan, let us follow the threads of trade, wealth, sophistication to another realm entirely, to the opulent homes of Persian merchants, where the Silk Road's treasures found their finest expression. Now, let us step away from the desolate hush of the Taklamakan's forgotten cities, and find ourselves transported to a very different world, one of splendor, comfort, and the heady fragrance of spice-laden air. Imagine standing before a grand merchant's mansion in a Persian city, perhaps in Samarkand or Isfahan. Those jeweled centers of commerce and culture nestled along the Silk Road. The air here is different, thick with the mingled scents of rosewater, incense, freshly ground spices, and the faint metallic temps of hammered silver. It is a world far removed from the dry winds and dusty caravans. The mansion itself is an oasis of opulence, built around a cool, shaded courtyard. Fountains burble softly in marble basins, their waters creating gentle echoes that mingle with the distant strumming of a cedar or oud lutes that sing in tender, intricate melodies. The architecture is a marvel of form and color. Tall walls are adorned with mosaic tiles in rich blues, emerald greens, and deep lapis hues. Each tile painted with delicate geometric patterns and verses of Persian poetry and flowing calligraphy. Imagine running your hand along a wall, the surface cool, the tiles smooth beneath your fingertips. Everywhere you look, light plays against colored glass set into intricate windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on polished stone floors. Inside, the merchant's residence is a gallery of global wealth. Silks from China, dyed in brilliant crimsons and gold, hang as drapes or are folded neatly in chests, inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Ivory combs and delicate fans from India, lacquerware from Japan, glassware from the Roman East, each object a testament to the long, winding paths by which they arrived here. In the grand reception room, deep carpets woven in intricate patterns soften each footstep. Cushions embroidered with silver and silk invite guests to recline comfortably as they sip sherbet. Cool, sweet drinks flavored with pomegranate or mint. Trays of dates, figs, and nuts sit alongside small dishes of honeyed pastries, their sticky sweetness balanced by strong, fragrant teas. And if you listen carefully, you might hear the quiet hum of conversation. Merchants negotiating contracts, poets reciting verses of Hafez or Rumi, or travelers recounting tales of distant lands. Each story carried across the Silk Road adds another thread to the mansion's tapestry of culture and commerce. In one corner, an alcove holds a library, scrolls, and bound books resting on wooden shelves. their pages filled with knowledge of astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. Persian scholars and their patrons cherished learning, and the written word was as prized as silk or spices. Here, too, the rhythms of prayer marked the passage of time. At dawn, noon, and dusk, the household pauses, and the soft murmur of devotion rises from the rooms, blending with the stillness of the air. Life within these walls is both refined and ritualized. Guests are welcomed with formal greetings, offered refreshments, and perhaps entertained with music or poetry. The merchant himself, dressed in rich but dignified robes, may wear a turban, carefully wrapped, symbolizing both status and decorum. And yet behind the elegance, there is purpose. This is a house built on the rhythms of trade. Caravans arrive bearing goods from afar, carried on the backs of camels that have endured months of travel across desert and mountain. Negotiations are struck over bolts of silk, chests of lapis, bundles of rare herbs, and sacks of saffron. The merchant's wealth is not merely displayed, it is leveraged, grown and exchanged, each object part of a greater web of commerce that spans the known world. As night falls, the mansion glows gently with the light of oil lamps, their flames flickering behind colored glass. Shadows play across the walls, the cool air carrying the soft laughter of guests and the lilting notes of a distant flute. Here, within these walls, the Silk Road transforms from a brutal journey to a tapestry of luxury and connection. It is a world of delicate flavors, poetic beauty, and human ingenuity, where the hardships of the road find their reward. And as we sit quietly in this merchant's mansion, listening to the rustle of silk and the murmur of stories shared by lamplight, we are reminded of the timeless desire for beauty, comfort, understanding that connects all who have walked the world's winding roads. Let us now draw this journey to a close, and in our final conclusion, reflect gently on the contrasts between the bone-dry trails of the Silk Road and the comforts we so often take for granted today. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a great expanse, stretching farther than the eye can easily follow, a sea of stalls, people, goods, and noise. This is Tlatelolco, the vast central marketplace of Tenochtitlan, the beating heart of Aztec commerce. Picture the air, dense with the mingling aromas of freshly ground maize, roasting chilies, and the faint metallic tang of obsidian tools, freshly honed for sale. The murmur of countless voices rises and falls like waves, punctuated by the sharp cries of merchants proclaiming their wares, each trying to outcall the next. The air hums with the rustling of textiles, the clink of copper trinkets, and the occasional bray of an animal being traded. The sheer scale is overwhelming. Tlatelolco was said to host tens of thousands of people each day, a market so large that even seasoned locals could not traverse its length without becoming fatigued. Imagine threading your way through crowded aisles, where stalls are arranged by category rows of pottery, stacks of cotton garments, piles of dried fish, and bright red cochineal dye pressed into cakes like ruddy jewels. There are baskets heaped with cacao beans, a prized currency, traded for everything from a morning drink to an afternoon indulgence. Nearby, trays display exotic feathers, their iridescent blues and greens glinting under the sun. Then there are the sounds, children calling out, porters grunting under heavy loads, the low drone of negotiations conducted in Nahuatl, the Aztec language. At every turn, there is another voice, another price to haggle over. Bartering is an art here, and even the simplest purchase demands patience, energy, and a sharp eye. But the market is not only a place of trade. It is a crossroads of the empire's diversity. Merchants arrive from distant lands, carrying obsidian from the highlands, salt from coastal plains, turquoise from the north, and cacao from the humid south. Their faces bear the features of many peoples, their clothes marked by the patterns of their regions. Yet the market unites them all in the frenetic rhythm of exchange. The smells, too, are relentless. Spices mingle with the rich aroma of tamales steaming, the acrid scent of leather being worked, and the faint but ever-present odor of blood, not from the market itself, but from the nearby temples, where sacrifices remind all who gather that life and death are intertwined here. The great temple, the Templo Mayor, looms not far from the market's bounds, its twin shrines dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc standing as silent towering witnesses to the bustling scene below. Occasionally, a trumpet call from the temple cuts through the market's din, reminding all present of their gods, their rulers, and their place within the cosmic order. Navigating this world is exhausting. The press of bodies, the constant vigilance against thieves, the mental calculations of barter, all wear down the traveler, the trader, and the casual shopper alike. At day's end, your feet would ache from walking miles on stone and earth. Your ears would still ring with the market's chorus. Your mind would whirl with the kaleidoscope of sights, scents, and the lingering image of the great temple's shadow. And yet, for the Aztecs, this was simply life. The necessary pulse of an empire built on trade, tribute, and the unceasing flow of goods and labor. We will leave the market behind soon, but its rhythms echo onward through the lives of those who walked its lanes, through the rulers who taxed its wealth, and through the rituals that sanctified its very existence. Let us now follow one such ruler, a figure both powerful and tragic, the last great emperor of the Aztecs, whose fate was tied not only to the market, but to the very survival of his people. Let us now turn our thoughts to the very core of Tenochtitlan, where once stood the sacred and imposing Templo Mayor, the Great Temple, a towering double pyramid that formed the heart of the city both spiritually and physically. Imagine standing before it in the soft morning haze. The steps rise steeply, broad and worn by countless feet, leading to twin shrines at the summit, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war, and the other to Tlaloc, the god of rain and agriculture. Two forces that governed the rhythm of life and death for the Aztecs. The temple itself was not built all at once, but layer upon layer, each successive ruler enlarging and enhancing it, like the rings of a mighty tree. Beneath every stone lies another, a history of expansion and renewal, reflecting the ambitions of rulers and the prosperity of the empire. As you ascend the steps in your mind, the sounds of the bustling city fade, replaced by the more solemn tones of conch shells, drums, and chanting priests. The air is thick with incense, copal resin burning in clay censers, releasing sweet, sharp smoke that clings to fabric and skin. At the summit, offerings are made. Precious goods. Figures carved from jade, obsidian blades, and sometimes more somber gifts in the form of human sacrifice. We acknowledge this with the quiet understanding that for the Aztecs, sacrifice was an act of cosmic balance. It's an essential offering to sustain the sun's journey across the sky and to ensure the rains would nourish the earth. Yet the Templo Mayor holds more than these grim tales. It is a palimpsest of belief and artistry. The temple was adorned with brightly painted reliefs, sculptures of gods and mythical creatures, serpents and jaguars, and great stone discs, like the famous Coilzoquai stone, which depicts the dismembered moon goddess, a powerful myth etched into stone. For centuries, the temple lay buried beneath the layers of time, hidden under the streets of Mexico City until its rediscovery in the late 20th century. In 1978, workers laying electrical cables stumbled upon a massive stone disc, the very Coilzoquai stone, which prompted extensive excavations. Archaeologists peeled back the layers of colonial buildings, carefully uncovering the temple's ancient foundations, each discovery a window into the Aztec past. Today, the Templo Mayor Museum showcases these finds: serpentine sculptures, painted murals, and offerings that once lay entombed in the earth. Among the most intriguing discoveries are the ritual offerings buried within the temple's layers: caches of seashells brought from distant coasts, crocodile skulls, elaborate masks, and bundles of jade, placed with meticulous care to honor the gods. Such offerings reveal the vast reach of the Aztec Empire, its networks of trade and conquest, and its deep connection to both the natural and supernatural worlds. Even the choice of animals and objects was symbolic, representing aspects of the cosmos, the underworld, and the celestial realms. To wander the ruins of the Templo Mayor today is to walk through echoes of rituals long silenced, of prayers whispered into the wind, of footsteps on stone stairways now worn and broken. The city of Mexico hums and roars around it, but here, in this sacred precinct, time feels suspended, as if the gods themselves still listen beneath the soil. And so, from this place of solemn reverence, we shall soon ascend to a different kind of elevation. Not of temples or pyramids, but of lush gardens, polished stones, and the quiet elegance of the Aztec nobility. Now, let us gently drift from the grandeur of temples and markets to a quieter, more refined corner of Aztec society, the world of the Aztec nobles, where the air was heavy, not with the clamor of trade, but with the delicate perfume of flowers. Imagine yourself entering the palace gardens of an Aztec noble Epipleton, as they were called. The gardens unfurl in careful symmetry, with pathways of smooth stone, lined with flowering bushes and towering trees brought from distant lands. The nobility of Tenochtitlan took great pride in cultivating these gardens, transforming them into lush sanctuaries amidst the vibrant, often chaotic city. Flowers held a particular significance for the Aztecs. They were more than decorative. They were symbols of beauty, poetry, and even war. There was a saying in the Aztec world in Xochitl: the flower, the song, which together represented the highest expressions of art and the fleeting nature of life. Here in these gardens, rare and vibrant blossoms bloomed: marigolds, dahlias, morning glories, and the prized Xochitl, or flower of many colors. The scent of sweet blossoms mixed with the earthiness of moist soil and the gentle trickle of water from stone fountains and aqueduct-fed pools. Strolling beneath the dappled light of broad-leafed trees, one might encounter carefully crafted sculptures, jaguars mid-pounce, eagles with wings unfurled, or serpents coiled in quiet menace, all carved in stone, part of the garden's serene narrative. These gardens were not merely for pleasure, they were also sites of philosophical reflection and poetry recitals. The nobility gathered to recite verses, to sing, to engage in discussions of cosmology, history, and the responsibilities of leadership. Imagine sitting beneath a flowering arbor, listening to the soft cadence of poetry in the Nahuatl language. Words that liken life to a flower that blossoms briefly, only to wither and return to the earth. As the noble classes also took great care with their personal adornments. Her garments were woven from fine cotton, dyed in rich colors, and embroidered with intricate patterns of animals, symbols, and geometric designs. Featherwork was especially revered. The art of crafting cloaks, fans, headdresses from vibrant quetzal and hummingbird feathers, a skill passed down through specialized artisans known as amanteca. These refined spaces, the nobility indulged in feasts served on polished stone or ceramic vessels, dishes of maize tamales, turkey stews, beans seasoned with chili and epazote, and of course chocolate. Prepared as a frothy, bitter drink spiced with vanilla or chili, reserved for the elite. Beyond the gardens and palaces, the nobles participated in formal ceremonies and ritual dances. Their movements slow and deliberate, each step a symbol, each gesture echoing the sacred stories of their ancestors. Music accompanied these dances, the deep tones of drums, the haunting notes of flutes, and the rattle of shells and seeds tied to the dancers' limbs. The contrast between this world and that of the bustling markets or the sacrificial temples is striking. Here, life is not defined by the press of the crowd, but by the curated experience of beauty, contemplation, and prestige. It is a reminder that even in a society so deeply entwined with warfare and ritual sacrifice, there was space for the delicate arts, for reflection on the ephemerality of existence, and for the cultivation of beauty in all its fleeting forms. And so, with the gentle fragrance of flowers still lingering in your mind, come to the end of our journey through the many layers of Aztec life, from the clamor of the markets, through the grandeur of empire, into the mysteries beneath the Templo Mayor, and finally, to the tranquil gardens of the noble class. Imagine waking in Paris, not to the smell of coffee or pastries, but to the sharp sting of an empty stomach. The year is 1789, and though the air is crisp, there is no breakfast waiting for you. Only the knowledge that the price of bread, the staff of life, has become unbearably high. Paris is a city alive with noise. The rattle of cartwheels on stone, the murmur of markets opening, the faint church bells marking the hour. But beneath these everyday sounds lies a low, insistent hum, the murmur of dissatisfaction. The conversations that begin with a sigh and end with the clenched fist. You pull on your coarse wool garments, perhaps patched and threadbare from too many winters, and step out into the narrow streets.
Are you ready?
A line is forming at the baker's shop. A crooked queue of gaunt figures, hoping for a loaf, hoping that the flour delivery arrived overnight. Bread is not just food, it is survival. And in Paris, the price of bread has become a symbol of everything that is wrong. The poor cannot afford it. The rich seem indifferent. And the King Louis XVI remains in his distant palace, cloaked in luxury. The smell of baking bread, usually inviting, is now almost cruel, a reminder of what you cannot have. Some in the line grumble openly. Others exchange rumors of bakers hoarding flour, of nobles conspiring to starve the people. The discontent spills over into the marketplaces. The Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where the workers of Paris gather not just to shop, but to vent. Fishmongers, butchers, vegetable sellers, their goods are meager, their prices high. Might pass a pamphlet vendor, hawking sheets of paper printed with fiery words, denunciations of the aristocracy, calls to action. The pamphlets crinkle in your hands, cheap paper, but heavy with meaning. Tensions build as the morning wanes. Soon, the crowd is less a line and more a mob. Someone shouts that a baker is hiding sacks of flour in his cellar. Another claims to have seen a cart of grain headed to the noble's district. The rumors swirl like smoke, fueling anger. And then, as always seems to happen, a spark ignites. Perhaps a soldier stationed nearby jostles a woman. Perhaps a baker refuses service. Or perhaps the hunger is simply too much to bear. The riot begins with a shout, a stone thrown, a shop window shattered. Barrels are overturned, loaves seized, bakers dragged into the street to face the fury of the mob. Imagine the clamor of voices, the sharp smell of sweat, dust, and panic. In the background, the persistent peal of the tocsin bell, warning that disorder has taken hold. You feel the press of bodies, the push and pull of the crowd, feet stumbling on uneven stones. There is shouting not just for bread, but for justice, for dignity, for an end to suffering. Yet overhead, the sky remains indifferent. the pale Parisian sun filtering weakly through gray clouds. The soldiers may arrive eventually. With their muskets and stern expressions, the National Guard formed to protect order, but as uncertain as anyone in these times of shifting loyalties, some rioters scatter. Some are arrested, perhaps dragged away in irons to the chilling walls of the conciergerie prison. And then the market is quiet again. Glass shards crunch underfoot, the air heavy with the yeasty tang of stolen bread. And the bitterness of a hunger briefly sated but never satisfied. You walk home with perhaps half a loaf, its crust hard, its interior dense. But it is food, for now. As evening settles over the city, you hear again the murmurs of neighbors, speaking of a general assembly, citizens' rights, of the Bastille, and of change. But for you, for the common Parisian in 1789, change comes slowly, if at all. Hunger, however, is always on time. And as the streets grow quiet, and the lanterns flicker in their iron frames, you lie on your straw pallet, stomach still uneasy, wondering what tomorrow's price of bread will be, and whether you'll afford it. Let us now wander, calmly, into the life of a man whose name is forever intertwined with the most chilling phase of the French Revolution, Maximilien Robespierre. Imagine him first, not as the stern, unsmiling figure of the Revolution, but as a small, serious child in the quiet town of Arros, in the north of France. Born in 1758, Robespierre was the son of a lawyer, a profession that whispered of stability and education, yet life did not begin kindly for him. His mother died when he was just 6, a loss that left a gentle vacancy in his early years. His father abandoned the family soon after, disappearing from records like a shadow fading into dusk. Raised by his grandparents, young Maximilien was sent to school on scholarship. There, in the chilly classrooms of the Louis-le-Grand in Paris, he was a quiet, meticulous student. He read Latin and Greek, absorbed the works of Rousseau, and developed a fascination with virtue, a term that would later define his politics and his peril. Robespierre trained as a lawyer, practicing in Arras. His speeches were precise, his manner restrained. But behind his spectacles and soft voice was a man deeply committed to moral rigor, the belief that the world could and should be purified through reason and justice. When the revolution began, Robespierre was elected to the Estates General, assembly called to address France's financial collapse. There, he found his cause. In the early days, his ideals were clear: equality before the law, universal suffrage for men, an end to privilege. He was nicknamed the Incorruptible, a title both admiring and ominous, for incorruptibility leaves little room for compromise. As the revolution spiraled, from the fall of the Bastille to the storming of Versailles to the execution of Louis XVI, Robespierre's influence grew. He joined the Committee of Public Safety, a name that masked the grim reality of its power. Paris, by 1793, was a city under a cloud of suspicion. The guillotine, its blade sharp and efficient, stood ready in the Place de la. Each drop of the blade marked not just the end of a life, but the steady erosion of trust and fraternity. Robespierre believed that terror was necessary, that to protect the revolution, to defend the fragile gains of liberty and equality, enemies must be eliminated. Imagine the quiet conviction in his voice as he argued that virtue without terror was powerless, and terror without virtue was blind. His speeches, delivered in clear, unwavering tones, justified the growing list of executions, not just nobles, but former allies, revolutionaries deemed insufficiently pure. Even Georges Danton, a fellow revolutionary and once an ally, fell beneath the guillotine. His crime, perhaps pragmatism, perhaps defiance, or perhaps simply being inconvenient. The terror, as it came to be called, became a rhythm of the city, each morning bringing new names to the lists, each afternoon witnessing another parade of carts, carrying the condemned to their fate. And yet Robespierre, aloof and isolated, saw himself not as cruel, but as a steward of the people's virtue. But even the most incorruptible can find themselves encircled by suspicion. Robespierre's insistence on moral purity made enemies of almost everyone: radicals, moderates, the fearful. In July of 1794, known as Thermidor in the revolutionary calendar, Robespierre stood before the convention, his once commanding presence reduced to frantic pleas. He was arrested, his jaw shattered in a botched suicide attempt, or perhaps by an officer's bullet. We will never quite know. Dragged to the same guillotine he had once defended, he met the end he had decreed for so many. The blade fell, and with it, the terror subsided, like a storm passing, leaving behind a drenched, silent city. Imagine now. The streets of Paris after his death, still damped from the night's mist. Echoes of fear still lingering in doorways, but the guillotine silent, the air lighter, though the scars would remain. Robespierre's legacy is a paradox. A man who believed in the purity of ideals, yet ushered in one of history's most chilling purges. His story is a reminder that conviction, unchecked, can harden into cruelty, and that even in the pursuit of virtue, the human cost can be unbearable. Now let us leave the bloodied squares of revolutionary Paris and step beneath the city itself, into the damp, dark corridors of its catacombs, where the bones of centuries rest in a hush deeper than sleep. Now, let us descend slowly, step by careful step, to the silence beneath the streets of Paris. The noise of the city above fades, the hum of carriages. The cries of the market stalls, the clatter of boot soles on cobblestones all dissolve into an earthy stillness. We are entering a space rarely spoken of in detail. The catacombs of Paris. You are not in a crypt built for ceremony. It's something else. This is a vast, tangled warren of tunnels, carved from the limestone that gave birth to the city's very foundations. And here, in the shadows, lie the bones of over 6 million souls. Let's begin at the beginning. In ancient times, Paris, then known as Lutetia, built atop rich quarries of creamy white limestone. Roman engineers and later medieval builders dug deep into the earth to extract the stone used to build the city's churches, bridges, and homes. But over the centuries, these subterranean quarries were largely abandoned, left hollow and mostly forgotten, until the 18th century. When a different crisis arose, the cemeteries of Paris were overflowing. By the 1770s, cemeteries like Les Innocents were packed beyond capacity. Corpses leaked into nearby wells. Air in certain neighborhoods grew foul. Complaints reached royal ears. And so, in 1786, an unusual solution was chosen. To relocate the remains of Paris's dead into the abandoned, quarry tunnels beneath the city, it was a logistical feat carried out with eerie ceremony. By night, cartloads of bones were rolled through the streets, accompanied by black-cloaked priests chanting the office of the dead. The remains of over a millennium were moved, layered, stacked, and arranged with grim precision. You can still see them today. Walls of femurs and skulls, arranged in haunting patterns, quietly holding back the weight of centuries. But these catacombs are more than just a resting place. They are a hidden map of the Undercity. Over 200 miles of tunnels, though only a small fraction is open to the public. There are rooms carved for rituals, graffiti left by revolutionaries, secret doors built by the resistance during World War II. Urban explorers, cataphiles speak of hidden amphitheaters, abandoned bunkers, and even a room once wired for cinema. Yet deeper still, beneath the layers of history, lie mysteries. In 1793, as the terror raged above, some citizens whispered that bodies were buried in secret beneath the city, those executed without record. Those too controversial for public death. There are tales, too, strange experiments during the Enlightenment. Early anatomists and surgeons who practiced dissection by the faint glow of candlelight, surrounded by walls of bones. And during the Revolution, the catacombs may have served another purpose: a refuge for political fugitives, a clandestine route for messengers, even a final hideout for secret meetings. Far from the prying ears of informants above, but not all who entered returned. Many sections of the catacombs are dangerous, with unstable ceilings and flooded corridors. In the modern era, urban legends speak of explorers who became lost, flashlights failing, their footsteps swallowed by darkness. Only fragments of camera footage or graffiti fading with time hint at their final paths. There are bones without names, rooms without maps, air that grows heavy with silence the deeper you go. Imagine it, the sensation of cool stone under your hand, drips echoing from somewhere distant, the faint scratch of gravel underfoot. You are alone, but not entirely, not with so many centuries watching. And yet the catacombs are not just grim. There is artistry in the way some remains were arranged. Heart-shaped designs, crosses made of skulls, columns of tibias like Roman pillars. Here, in this strange necropolis, the past is both forgotten and remembered, mute and eloquent. Above, Paris bustles, the city of light shines on. But below, beneath thee in carousels, millions sleep. Their dreams are lost to time, but their presence remains stacked neatly, patiently, endlessly.
Ow.
When you are ready, we will return above ground, but not to the world of revolution and terror. This time, we will climb the steps into the grand salons of the 18th century Parisian elite, where powdered wigs and silver spoons reigned, far removed from the fear that gripped the common people. Welcome now to very different Paris. Step gently into the hush of a gilded salon, where the light of a dozen candles dances across polished parquet floors, and the air carries a whisper of lavender and powdered hair. Here, in the waning decades of the 18th century, we enter the world of the Parisian aristocracy, a world seemingly untouched by the smells, sounds, and struggles of the city beyond its walls. Imagine, you are a guest in a hotel particulier, a grand private townhouse tucked discreetly along the Rue Saint. The doorman, liveried and silent, opens the gate. You're led past a sculpted garden, into a hall where frescoes gleam in the candlelight. In music, perhaps a harpsichord drifts faintly from a distant chamber. This is not just wealth. It is leisure, ritual, and spectacle, refined into an art form. And it begins with the day's routine, which unfolds not with labor or haste, but with carefully choreographed pleasure. In the morning, a noblewoman might receive visitors. In bed, this was the lever, a formal rising where friends, poets, and portrait artists could visit, while the lady took her chocolate and adjusted her curls. She might wear a voluminous morning gown robe de chambre, and her bed curtains would be tied open just enough to create the image of ease, but not impropriety. Fashion, of course, was a daily drama. Dresses were structured with whalebone stays, hooped underskirts called panniers, and layers of embroidered silk. Men wore tailored coats, breeches, powdered wigs, and red-heeled shoes, a mark of privilege once restricted to those with noble blood. Hair was its own landscape, heightened with powder and wire frames, sometimes adorned with miniature ships, plumes, fruit, or garden scenes. To be elite was to be a walking tableau. Meals were not rushed affairs, but performances of refinement. Servants moved silently between courses. Fine porcelain, silver cutlery, and crystal glasses reflected not just wealth, but social mastery. And yet, beneath all this ritual lay a deep preoccupation: reputation. To offend, to misstep in etiquette, was to risk humiliation or exclusion. There were rules about whom to speak to, how deeply to curtsy, when to laugh, and what topics were acceptable at table. The elite held court not only in salons, but in letters and libels, those venomous little pamphlets that fluttered through the city, spreading gossip like sparks in dry straw. And what did they discuss? Many fancied themselves patrons of philosophy and science. They read Voltaire, discussed Rousseau. They hosted cultured women who curated lively, often radical discussions about liberty, reason, and the rights of man. But here's the tension. While they sipped wine and debated Enlightenment ideals, their kitchens were staffed with underpaid cooks. Their estates maintained by peasants barely surviving, their gowns sewn by seamstresses who could not afford bread. They danced through masquerade balls, their masks embroidered and edged in silver thread. Even as the rumblings of revolution reached the city gates, and perhaps for a time, they believed their world was eternal. But Paris, as always, was listening. Salons grew quieter. The streets outside grew restless. Even as chandeliers flickered in time with minuets, someone was whispering the words of Robespierre. Some of those noblewomen in pearls would later ride in ox carts to the Place de la, their hair shorn, their hands tied. But tonight, in this moment, they are still here, poised over their embroidery hoops, smiling softly at a clever turn of phrase. Not yet aware of the tide about to rise. Let us rest here, in the stillness before the storm. The scent of beeswax polish and rosewater lingers. The fire in the marble hearth crackles low. Somewhere beyond the shuttered windows, a distant bell tolls midnight. You are safe. the world is quiet. The past breathes softly through painted walls and the hush of silk. Sleep well, dear listener. And may history keep you company through the night. Imagine yourself now, not as a noble or a scholar, but as a craftsman. A quiet, calloused figure bent beneath a vaulted ceiling. Your hands forever flecked with dust and lime. Your back hunched from long hours on stone. You work in a Byzantine mosaic workshop, a place of beauty, yes, but also of relentless routine. Begins before sunrise. You stir awake in a cramped corner of a stone tenement. Somewhere in the artisans' quarter of Constantinople, the air is damp, tinged with the sharp temps of lime paste and smoke. You chew a piece of bread stale, crusted with ash, and pull on a coarse woolen tunic stiff with dust. The streets are still hushed. Only the occasional clang of a distant bell or the soft creak of a wooden cart on cobblestones marks the start of another long day. Your workshop is tucked beneath the scaffolding of a half-finished church. It is dark, save for a single oil lamp that hisses faintly in the gloom. The walls are stained with years of soot, the air thick with the bitter scent of powdered stone and animal glue. You don't speak much. There's little time. You are one of dozens of laborers' apprentices, journeymen, slaves, all working under the sharp eye of a master mosaicist, whose word is absolute and whose cane is never far from hand. Your task is to cut tesserae, tiny cubes of stone, glass, and ceramic used to build shimmering images across church domes and palace walls. Each tessera must be perfect, cut precisely, shaped with care, its edges smoothed so they fit tightly with their neighbors. You use a heavy iron chisel, and the pounding rhythm of your mallet echoes hour after hour. There is no protective gear. Your fingertips are raw. Your eyes sting from the powdered pigments, many of them laced with lead, mercury, or arsenic. The brilliant blues are made from crushed lapis lazuli, the greens from ground malachite. They sparkle under light. But they seep into your skin. You breathe through your sleeve, but it does little good. The master checks your work with the precision of a court official. If the tesserae are too large, you'll redo them. If the edges are jagged, you may not be paid at all. And yet, what you are building is extraordinary. Above you, the interior of a church is slowly taking shape. Saints and angels, draped in gold and deep sapphire, begin to emerge like divine apparitions. You'll never sign your name to them. No record will ever note your contribution. But your fingers place every glinting tile, one by one, in patient silence. Breaks are few. You eat your lunch, squatting near the fire, barley cake, and olives. Some days you carry buckets of glue or lime wash up unstable ladders, risking your footing for a clearer view of the ceiling's progress. Others spend hours mixing colors, stirring hot wax, or carving letters into stone. The workshop is a world apart, an island of focused labor within a bustling capital. Outside, chariots rumble and markets bustle. But here time is marked by the slow, meditative pattern of hand to hammer, tile to wall. Occasionally a bishop or wealthy patron visits, robes sweeping the floor, nose wrinkled at the mess. They praise the vision, the progress, the sacred radiance of the saints. They do not look at you. Your body aches, your wrists throb. And when the day finally ends, after sunset, you wash in a cold basin, scraping dust from your hair, watching it swirl in the gutter. Then you sleep, not because you want to, but because you must. Tomorrow, you'll do it again and again and again. Such was the rhythm of life in the hidden heart of a Byzantine workshop, where beauty came at the cost of exhaustion, and splendor was built from silence. From the shadows of a crumbling empire rose to unlikely rulers whose ambition, vision, and sheer willpower would shape centuries to come. But behind the mosaics and marble lies a tale of resilience, upheaval, and quiet ruthlessness. From its high balconies you could look out over the bustling streets, the great hippodrome, the golden dome of Hagia Sophia gleaming in the sun. But inside its marble halls, history was being written, not only through policy or conquest, but through the lives of two people who defied the expectations of their time: Justinian and Theodora. Let us leave behind the echoing clatter of the artisan's studio for now, and turn our attention toward the imperial palace, the beating heart of Constantinople. Their story begins in obscurity. His family were peasants, simple folk, with no claim to power or nobility. and deeply intelligent woman qualities that caught the eye of Justinian, who was by then on the verge of becoming emperor himself. He immersed himself in law, theology, and administration, and soon became his uncle's most trusted advisor. Though still young, he was diligent, methodical, and utterly devoted to the Byzantine ideal, a fusion of Roman law, Christian orthodoxy, and imperial majesty. Their marriage, in many ways, was a revolution in itself, one born not of politics or necessity, but of mutual respect. As a girl, Theodora performed on stage, and according to contemporary accounts, some slanderous, others admiring, she lived a difficult life that involved both hardship and independence. At court, she advised him. In matters of faith, she shaped policy. Moments of crisis, she proved unshakable. Factions loyal to the racing teams, the blues and the greens, turned their discontent into chaos. Their anger was stoked by oppressive taxes, legal reforms, and court intrigue. Before long, the streets were aflame. For 5 days, Constantinople was a city of fear and fire. The crowd called for Justinian's removal. Over 30,000 people were killed in the violence. His uncle Justin, however, was a man of quiet determination. After moving to Constantinople to serve in the imperial guard, Justin rose slowly through the ranks, benefiting from a long life, strong reputation, and the tendency of emperors to die without heirs. Justinian was born around the year 482 in the province of Illyria, in what is now part of the Balkans. When Justin became emperor in 518, an improbable rise for a former swineherd, he brought his nephew. Justinian into the heart of power. Justinian was a quick learner. But if Justinian's ascent was improbable, Theodora's was nearly impossible. She had been born to a bear trainer, humble man who worked in the hippodrome. After his death, her family fell into poverty. By the time she returned to Constantinople, she had matured into a thoughtful, shrewd. He was entranced. Though Roman law forbade senators from marrying actresses, Justinian persuaded his uncle to change it. When Justinian ascended to the throne in 527, Theodora became his empress. And not merely in title, she ruled beside him. One such moment came during the Nika Riots of 532. The hippodrome, so often a site of sport and celebration, became the epicenter of unrest. Justinian wavered. He considered fleeing the city. But Theodora, calm and resolute, refused. Purple is a fine color for a shroud, she reportedly said, meaning that death in dignity was better than survival in shame. Her courage steadied him. Together they called upon General Belisarius, who restored order. The insurrection was brutally crushed. The city would recover but not forget. From that point onward, Justinian and Theodora governed with firmer hands. They undertook sweeping legal reforms. Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis, the Code of Civil Law, would later influence medieval Europe and modern legal systems alike. She pushed for laws protecting women from forced prostitution and expanding rights in divorce and property ownership. She supported the monotheistic Christians, those who differed from Orthodox doctrine, helping them avoid persecution. Despite theological tension at court, they built or rebuilt the infrastructure of the city. Most famously, after the Nika Riots left the previous church in ruins, they commissioned the construction of a new Hagia Sophia. Theodora, meanwhile, advocated for women's rights. But their reign was not without shadows. They taxed heavily to fund wars and building projects. Their relationship with the Senate was cold, even hostile, and their desire for unity, both political and religious, sometimes led to intolerance. From the shadows of a crumbling empire rose to unlikely rulers whose ambition, vision, and sheer willpower would shape centuries to come. But behind the mosaics and marble lies a tale of resilience, upheaval, and quiet ruthlessness. Let us leave behind the echoing clatter of the artisan's studio for now, and turn our attention toward the imperial palace, the beating heart of Constantinople. From its high balconies, you could look out over the bustling streets, the great hippodrome, the golden dome of Hagia Sophia gleaming in the sun. But inside its marble halls, history was being written, not only through policy or conquest, but through the lives of two people who defied the expectations of their time. Justinian and Theodora. Their story begins in obscurity. Justinian was born around the year 482 in the province of Illyria, in what is now part of the Balkans. His family were peasants, simple folk with no claim to power or nobility. His uncle Justin, however, was a man of quiet determination. After moving to Constantinople to serve in the imperial guard, Justin rose slowly through the ranks, benefiting from a long life, a strong reputation, and the tendency of emperors to die without heirs. When Justin became emperor in 518, an improbable rise for a former swineherd, he brought his nephew Justinian into the heart of power. Justinian was a quick learner. He immersed himself in law, theology, and administration, and soon became his uncle's most trusted advisor, though still young. He was diligent, methodical, and early devoted to the Byzantine ideal, a fusion of Roman law, Christian orthodoxy, and imperial majesty. He was entranced. Though Roman law forbade senators from marrying actresses, Justinian persuaded his uncle to change it. Their marriage in many ways was a revolution in itself, one born not of politics or necessity, but of mutual respect. When Justinian ascended to the throne in 527, Theodora became his empress, and not merely in title she ruled beside him. At court, she advised him. In matters of faith, she shaped policy. In moments of crisis, she proved unshakable. One such moment came during the Nika Riots of 532. The hippodrome, so often a site of sport and celebration, became the epicenter of unrest. Factions loyal to the racing teams, the blues and the greens, turned their discontent into chaos. Their anger was stoked by oppressive taxes, legal reforms, and court intrigue. Before long, the streets were aflame. For 5 days, Constantinople was a city of fear and fire. The crowd called for Justinian's removal. Over 30,000 people were killed in the violence. Justinian wavered. He considered fleeing the city. But Theodora, calm and resolute, refused. Purple is a fine color for a shroud, she reportedly said, meaning that death in dignity was better than survival in shame. Her courage steadied him. Together they called upon General Belisarius, who restored order. The insurrection was brutally crushed. The city would recover but not forget. From that point onward, Justinian and Theodora governed with firmer hands. They undertook sweeping legal reforms. Justinian S. Corpus Juris, Civilis Code of Civil. Law would later influence medieval Europe and modern legal systems alike. They built or rebuilt the infrastructure of the city, most famously. After the Nika Riots left the previous church in ruins, they commissioned the construction of a new Hagia Sophia. Theodora, meanwhile, advocated for women's rights. She pushed for laws protecting women from forced prostitution and expanding rights in divorce and property ownership. She supported the monophysite Christians, those who differed from Orthodox doctrine, helping them avoid persecution. Despite theological tension at court, but their reign was not without shadows. They taxed heavily to fund wars and building projects. Their relationship with the Senate was cold, even hostile. Their desire for unity, both political and religious, sometimes led to intolerance. In 548, Theodora died, likely of cancer. She was still in her 40s. Her passing marked a profound loss for Justinian, who continued to rule for nearly 2 decades more, but never quite with the same fire. When he died in 565, the Byzantine Empire was at its height, territorially expansive. Culturally vibrant, legally reformed, but cracks had begun to show. The gains in the West were tenuous. The treasury was strained. Dissent simmered. And yet, centuries later, the names Justinian and Theodora remain carved into marble, remembered not just for what they built, but for who they were, 2 unlikely figures who changed the course of an empire. Now, let us leave the imperial palace and drift once more into a place of mystery, a great monument that defies time itself. We turn next to a wonder of the ancient world still standing in modern Istanbul, Hagia Sophia. Beneath its vast dome, the echoes of emperors, sultans, and forgotten prayers still linger. A church, a mosque, a museum, and, now again, a moscagia. Sophia has stood for nearly 1,500 years, surviving fire, conquest, and earthquake. But what hidden truths lie behind its marble walls? As the morning light creeps across the skyline of Istanbul, it finds its way to a massive silhouette of Hagia Sophia. Its dome dominates the horizon, like a low-hanging sun. Its minarets pointing skyward, and its walls radiating the soft orange of ancient stone. This is not merely a building. It is a story etched in stone and gold. Hagia Sophia, Greek for Holy Wisdom, was built at Justinian's command after the Nika Riots of 532. He wanted a church that would symbolize not only the glory of God, but also the resilience and grandeur of his empire. Construction began at a remarkable pace. Over 10,000 workers labored under the direction of two men not trained as architects, but as mathematicians and engineers, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. Their approach was radical. Rather than building upward in a traditional basilica style, they envisioned a massive central dome, 32 meters wide, set atop a square base supported by pendentives, curved triangular sections that allowed the circular dome to rest on rectangular walls. It was an unprecedented feat. Incredibly, the entire structure was completed in just under 6 years. In 537, Justinian stood beneath its dome and, according to legend, declared Solomon, "I have surpassed thee." But Hagia Sophia was never just stone and mortar. From the very beginning, it was a repository of secrets, both artistic and political. The mosaics alone tell a hidden tale. On the apse, a serene image of the Virgin Mary with Christ in her arms gazes down at visitors. But over the centuries, the church saw many changes when iconoclasm swept the empire in the 8th and 9th centuries. Declaring the veneration of images heretical, many of these mosaics were covered, defaced, or destroyed. Later, under the Macedonian Renaissance, they were restored, revealing glittering images of Christ Pantocrator, imperial portraits, and saints whose eyes seem to follow you in the flickering candlelight. Yet many visitors today pass by, details unnoticed. For instance, tucked away in the upper galleries is the mosaic of Empress Zoe. She had her own face replaced at least twice to reflect her changing husband's, each time inserting the new emperor's image beside her eternal presence. And in the floor of the nave is the omphalion, a circular pattern of colored marble where emperors were crowned. The swirling colors are not just decorative. They mark a sacred center of the Byzantine world, a symbolic navel of the empire. But it's not only Christian secrets that live within these walls. In 1453, when Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, Sultan Mehmed II entered Hagia Sophia in awe. He ordered it preserved, not destroyed. It was converted into a mosque, and Islamic elements were gradually added. For minarets, a mihrab indicating the direction of Mecca, and massive circular medallions bearing the names of Allah, Muhammad, and the first caliphs. The Christian mosaics were plastered over, not erased, but hidden. This layering of faith and history gives the building its quiet complexity. For nearly 500 years, it served as Istanbul's principal mosque. Then, in 1935, under the secular reforms of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, it became a museum, a place, not of worship, but of memory. And yet the secrets continued to surface. In the 20th century, scholars carefully removed plaster to reveal ancient mosaics unseen for centuries. The Desis mosaic Christ flanked by the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist emerged, haunting and expressive, showing faces rendered with humanity rarely seen in earlier Byzantine art. Earthquakes threatened its dome many times, yet it was always rebuilt, buttressed, and reinforced. Some believe that sacred relics are buried beneath the altar. Others speak of hidden chambers, closed-off stairwells, and forgotten symbols carved into the stone by Viking mercenaries, the Varangian Guard who once served the emperors and left their graffiti behind. One such inscription reads simply, "Havden was here," a mundane message in an extraordinary place. Hagia Sophia today still stands, its purpose evolving, yet its essence unchanged. Whether approached by the faithful in prayer or curious travelers beneath its dome, it remains a monument to resilience. It is a quiet testament to the empires that rise and fall, the faiths that converge and diverge, and the artisans of Phone Anonymous who shaped its stones. And as the light fades through its arched windows, a hush settles in the air. Now, as sleep draws near, we turn to the final chapter, a slower, gentler exploration. We will leave behind emperors and wars and mysteries, and instead settle into the quiet life of the elite, the palace dwellers. Eunuchs, tutors, and noblewomen who lived not in the streets, but behind silken curtains. While the streets of Constantinople bustled with traders, priests, and artisans, the inner sanctums of the great palace remained cloaked in ritual and silence. Here, life moved to a different rhythm, calculated, ceremonial, and constrained. This was the world of eunuchs, courtiers, tutors, scribes, and noblewomen. A world of marble corridors, whispered intrigues, and velvet shadows. Let us slip off our sandals and walk quietly through the halls of the imperial palace, the Magnara, the Chrysotraklanos, and the hidden gardens that stretched between marbled pavilions. These were not noisy places. Even in their splendor, they were built for silence and order. The shuffle of sandals on mosaics, the creak of doors carved with gold leaf, the low murmur of ritual greetings repeated exactly every day for centuries. Imagine for a moment waking up in one of these palace chambers as a member of the imperial household. You would not rise to the sound of roosters or street criers. Instead, a eunuch attendant, totally loyal, refined in manner, and thoroughly trained might enter your room at dawn, carrying perfumed water in a polished copper basin. The soft glow of oil lamps reflects on the marble walls, as warm cloth is pressed to your forehead, and the day begins not with haste, but ceremony. If you were a member of the imperial family, your clothing would be prepared in silence, tunics dyed in imperial purples, decorated with embroidered eagles, woven with golden thread. Jewelry was not always flamboyant. Pearls and garnets, lapis lazuli and polished emeralds were chosen with symbolic meaning, not just splendor. You might spend your morning not in leisure, but in protocol. The Byzantine court was defined by ceremonial precision. Every movement, every word, was governed by rank, ritual, and sacred symbolism. The emperor himself rarely appeared casually. His entrances were choreographed to evoke all golden robes, incense, chanting choirs, mechanical lions roaring beside the throne, and jewel-encrusted curtains parting at exactly the right moment. As a courtier, you might be summoned to one of the palace's many reception halls, perhaps to attend a ceremony of tribute from foreign envoys, or to accompany the empress to the chapel of the Virgin for morning prayers. These rituals might seem stiff to an outsider, but within the court, they were essential. They maintained order, reinforcing the hierarchy that held the sprawling empire together. For women of the court, especially those of noble or imperial blood, life was even more secluded. The gyneceum, or women's quarters, were not prisons, but they were private. Education for noblewomen was often rigorous: philosophy, theology, languages, and music. A young noblewoman might have tutors in both Homer and the Psalms, or be tasked with embroidering vestments for the clergy. While discussing theological disputes with her chaplain, some women became powerful in this constrained world. Empresses like Theodora, Irene, and Zoe wielded enormous influence from behind these curtains. But others led quiet lives, writing poetry, tending gardens, or managing the household staff with the skill of a general. Meals in the palace were not rowdy banquets. Instead, they were calm affairs, often taken in silence, especially on religious days. Fish, olives, lentils, and honeyed pastries. Wine diluted with water. Servants padded about the room, careful not to disturb the stillness. Everything was balanced. Even leisure was measured. And for the eunuchs, the ever-present intermediaries between the emperor and the outside world, life was a paradox. They could never marry, nor inherit wealth. And yet, they often rose to great heights of power. Trusted with secrets, managing access, guarding the sacred chambers, leading religious processions, or even military expeditions, their presence was constant yet ghostly. One such figure was Basil Lycanos, an illegitimate son of an emperor, castrated in infancy and raised in the palace. He rose to become Parakoimonos, the keeper of the imperial bedchamber, and effectively ruled the empire for decades. Always in the background, always in the shadow of the throne. Evenings in the palace brought a hush even deeper than the day. Oil lamps were lit in the corridors. Incense lingered from the vespers in the palace chapel. Some might gather in quiet salons for music played on a lyre or a monochord. Others would take solitary walks beneath moonlit colonnades, cloaked in silence and thought. and then sleep. Within their chambers, the elite lay on low couches covered with silks, lulled not by street sounds, but by the distant rhythm of waves lapping against the sea walls, or the faint rustle of ivy against marble. The world outside the palace may have been unpredictable threats of war, earthquakes, intrigued, but within these walls, the rhythm of life was steady, measured, controlled. It was, in its own way, a kind of golden cage. And so ends our journey through the Byzantine world, from the grime of the markets to the firelit halls of emperors, from secret mosaics to silent chambers. Sleep now, knowing that history, in all its glittering complexity, is always waiting to whisper its stories again.